All right. We have a very special episode today. I have two guests, count them two. We have Nicholas Polimenakos with us, and we have Elodie St-Onge-Aubut to join me on a discussion on a big topic, huge topic in the skies, Pluto in Aquarius. Thank you for joining me, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thanks,
having us.
Mel.
Yeah, we're gonna get in it. I don't know where we're gonna end up, but it's a big topic. Pluto in Aquarius. I mean, we have big topics just swirling around in March, just in general. We're literally recording this on the last day of Saturn in Aquarius, who is about to switch signs at our full moon in Virgo tomorrow on the 7th. Of course, this will air how long after that, but just so you know where we're at.
hmm This
Yeah.
is like this month is like the astrologer's content dream month. It's like if you need content, it's there every day, every single day. There's something on a bigger level, minor level. It's all there. But for the times that we're in, talking about astrology through social media and through content, this is like a dream month.
There's too much, I think.
Yeah.
It's like overwhelming people. That's why I kind of took a back seat. I was like, there's just too much. It's just
Yeah, it's not my particular dream month. I'm taking the same route. Like, what can I only could do so much. I don't want to do it all, but
yeah.
what we're doing today is the centerpiece, I guess I would say. I mean, we're
It
just talking about
is.
the next 20 years. So,
No big deal. I was thinking about that actually right before we got on Zoom. Pull it back 20 years ago. Think about 2003. What has happened since 2003? What
yeah.
hasn't happened? That's a totally different world. And I know that will be something that we'll get into at more of the end of the program, kind of looking into the future. And there's so many far-fetched ways you can go with a Pluto and Aquarius. Oh my God, what could possibly happen? But what could possibly happen? Because I mean, we think back to 2003, like the advent before as Google just gets started and Facebook is just this baby
Mhm.
infant, and like our world is totally different since that time period. And I mean, that's for a slew of other things, but
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah, yeah, totally. But yeah, I just made me think about I'm not going to bring up my personal life 2003, but basically how, interaction. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. This got three of us on camera doing this thing where it's happening and it seems like real time. There's no delay. uh you know it's weird with technology and what's happened. It's almost like back in the day there was always movies and books about time travel, about wanting to go to one place in the past or in the future. And if you think about all the way back when uh, there was postal carriers, right? People write a letter and put a stamp on it, and it took whatever amount of time to go somewhere. Or even back in the day, there's the ravens and messaging, and it takes a certain bit of time. But now it doesn't take any time for something to go from one place to the other.
We were talking about pagers last night,
Yeah.
actually.
Yep.
We're like, let's bring back pagers, but then remember that was only drug dealers who had
Yeah.
them.
I had a pager.
I had a pager.
Yeah.
I did not need a pager, but I had a pager because
Yeah.
it looked cool on your hip.
Yeah.
It was
Must be a Seattle thing or something.
It was see-through. Mine was see-through. You could see through. But the thing about pagers is you had to take the extra step of finding a telephone to call somebody back.
Right. Yeah.
So, you're looking for quarters and looking for a booth, a phone booth. Like, and people are going to be watching this. They're like, what the hell are they talking about? Pagers, phone booth, taking a coin and putting it in a slot to do a communication connection. So, anyway, we're going back to what you're talking about 20 years ago, or just what 20 years means when it comes to communication and interaction. It's just mind blowing. It's like 100 years, really. If we think about a progression of technology or what humans have used to deal with each other, so time is sped up. It feels like we're able to jump from here to there whenever we want.
The other thing too is that when delineating like the Pluto and Aquarius era, we don't have a choice of delineating the air period. And so I've seen kind of an overlap, and especially with astrologer, kind of overlapping the signification of what it means to enter the air period versus Pluto and Aquarius. I think there's a bit of confusion in both, because Pluto entering Aquarius is the beginning of the air period too. And the air period is, you know, the technology that we're seeing. I don't know necessarily that they are the same. I think the distinction needs to be made, because there's a danger of just kind of like putting it all in one bag, you know. There is the air period coming through, which is, you know, a lot of technology, and then Pluto and Aquarius, which will be also that technology, but it's a corruption too, because we're talking about Pluto.
Yeah.
There's like corrupted element to it, which is interesting at the beginning of the air period.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you're saying there too, because when you bring up corruption, and I like that word for Pluto, because I mean, corruption, if we think about it, is some sort of taking advantage of or manipulation of. It's become corrupted. It's almost poisoned, right? Like there's some sort of poison that comes through, and a lot of times people don't catch poison. You don't see poison. Sometimes obvious stuff, like somebody gets bitten by a certain type of snake, and it's obvious they're getting poisoned. But for the most part, when we deal with certain things that are corrupted or fading or illness, it's corruption from within. You don't really know and catch it. And in this sense, I can bring up a more modern view of the subconscious, what happens, the corruptions within us, you know, and then what happens outwardly, reflective in culture in the world, how the corruptions appear, which really the corruptions within us. Right. So, you know, when it comes to technology, what you're talking about, Elodie, and stuff, like, yeah, we went 20 years. We went 20 years. We started talking about 20 years ago, whatever, but we're talking about all this technology, and here we are now. You would think on paper, like, oh, Pluto and Aquarius is going to start off, and this is when it really kicks in, but it already has kicked in. But I think here, the next chapter, I don't think we're being negative. I just think we're being real, that I think the next chapter here, when it comes to technology and certain things, is the obvious corruption. And it's already blatantly there in my mind, like in my eyes. I see it. I don't know if a lot of other people do, and the people who don't, I think they're going to see it in their own way. They're going to have their own reality check with corruption and how they interact with technology, you know, in the world and with other people. So,
yeah, it's I mean, when do you even think about corruption? First thing that comes to mind is the advent of all this technology and this social media and the increased news cycle and presence of just everything that's out there. Our just overall awareness of corruption is like tenfold, you know, because there's so many corrupted things going on the planet for millennia, right? But how many times do we actually know about it? And we're in this space where we see it literally every single day, like all these, you know.
Yeah, that was a lot of the work of Pluto and Capricorn, was to kind of unearth the sort of hierarchical capitalist corruption that is taking place and make us aware of that. We're kind of emerging from that realization. I think that culminated with Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, just like really blatantly just seeing the corrupted structures of society and how it works. And that segues us into the Aquarian time, which is a lot more equalitarian.
Yeah.
And so
idealistically.
So we're like, let's deconstruct these hierarchical structures. Like, there's people who have power. Why do they have power? It doesn't make any sense. And we can see, like, the last couple of years, the dialogue culturally is Bezos. Why does he have all this money? If the wealth was distributed equally, everybody would be comfortable. So there's this awareness now of the corruption, thanks to Pluto and Capricorn. And then we're moving into Pluto and Aquarius, which obviously there's like all sorts of manifestation, but I think, yeah, we can get into it. But I think this sort of collective awareness of how corrupted the systems are, I think that's like direct work of Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah, it was the prepper. It was the fluffer. It was getting us ready. Or we're like, what are we gonna do about this? What are you just gonna talk about it? You just gonna pretend it doesn't exist? Like, it's like the reform element that is going to come in. And I feel like that speaks to the ages when we're going to go back in kind of time and look at previous passes of Pluto in Aquarius.
Yeah, reform is a good word for Aquarius, I find.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah.
And should we jump into something? Because you're talking about reform and something already popped into my brain of like one of the things that we're going to talk about. I don't know if we go there yet, but I also actually, let me say this too. It's interesting the timing of things because of Pluto and Capricorn, Pluto and Aquarius, but like Saturn's been a major part of this too, because of Capricorn, and Jupiter too. Jupiter's been along for this kind of build up and ride through Capricorn, through Aquarius, then when we just did Jupiter and Pisces, but we did have Jupiter involved here also. And so I don't want to forget about that, but I'm personally excited for the corruption to be revealed.
We're all excited, I think.
Yeah, I think
we got our popcorn. We're ready.
I don't know if it's because of who we are generationally, because we started talking about pagers here, so it kind of shows a little bit of our generation, right? But it's like I'm excited for the unearthing of corruption on a more mass level. And I think a lot of times when something like this happens, you get examples that we're going to talk about, like certain revolutions that have happened, certain things, is because things have to permeate culture in such a way where there's a mass type of mass humane collective shift and people doing things together, and even though we feel together and we're interacting with each other because of technology, when we deal with major shifts where everyone's almost on the same wavelength, this is what I'm excited for personally. And I don't know, we don't know exactly how it's going to go, but we're looking back on history and we're seeing shifts that happen collectively, so one way, anyway, I guess we could save a little bit of that for later, but
save a little of that later. So I guess, I didn't even really get to give you guys like a few seconds to say who you even were. We just jumped right in there. We're like, we got things to talk about.
Yeah.
So Nicholas, you still have the floor. Just give a brief, who the hell are you? Why are you on this podcast?
I'm human. Pluto has a major influence in my chart. Thanks for saying my name correctly, Nicolas Polimenakos. My website is sparklesofgold.com. I'm on YouTube. I've been an astrologer, I don't know, for a while now. So I do one-on-one consultations along with some YouTube videos, and also have helped out behind the scenes in the astrology world. So that's who I am.
Love it. Elodie, who you be?
Well, I'm a French Canadian, obviously, with this name. And I'm an astrologer in Newfoundland, but obviously World Wide Web. And I'm good friend with Nicholas, and coming to be good friend with you too. And I love Pluto. I love the underworld, actually. I journey there often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got the hounds of hell on your shirt today, right?
That's right. There you go.
We got the gatekeeper. Oh my goodness, I love it. All right, well, let's just jump in there and talk a little bit quickly about some just technical details before we kind of get into things. And I actually made a little, somewhat of a presentation here to, if you're watching the video, to have a visual of some sort. Who doesn't love visuals? Amazing. Here? We got our Pluto in Aquarius, which is going to ingress for the first time on Thursday, March 23rd of 2023. So literally just coming down the pipeline here. And it's going to be a brief first entrance. We're going to have it just kind of dance on that 0 degree of Aquarius, which actually is a very important degree that has been hit in the last couple of years because of Jupiter Saturn having conjuncted there. So that's a piece that we could probably bring in. But it's going to move out in June 11th of 2023 to go back into Capricorn for a little bit longer Ingress again, January 20th of 2024 to spend time until September 1st of that year, back into Capricorn one more time, final business to be done. And then it will officially enter Aquarius on November 19th of 2024. And it will be there until 2043, 2044, it'll do that same dance in and out of Pisces. So this is a long period of time. And one of the things, like, what's interesting, I think, about the Pluto cycle is we're starting to get into the long Pluto years, right? You know, just the way Pluto's orbit is, it's when it Virgo through Capricorn are like the shortest transits. And so here we're entering this, you know, nearly 20-year period that's going to then go to 23 years in Pisces, almost 30 in Aries. Of course, I have a graph up here that is showing the cycle of Pluto since the early 1800s when it was in Aries. But any thoughts on those, on just how Pluto has different moves through different signs? Just curious.
Yeah, well, I had some thoughts about the different ingresses because it's really interesting. We were talking about Pluto and Capricorn kind of finalizing the eruption of corruption, you know, like the money system or whatever, anything Capricorn represent on a mundane level. And the back and forth that Pluto does back in Capricorn, I think, is really at the 29th degree, which is a critical degree, is really, yeah. I think it's going to continue, like we said, like unearthing that. And if we look at the first ingress of Pluto in Aquarius, it's literally on the spring equinox. There's this real sort of crucial zero moment, like the sun, moon, we have a new moon at 0 Aries. It's just kind of like, it's really poignant to look at as an astrologer. And then when it re-enters in January 2024, it'll be conjunct the sun in Aquarius on that day. Like it at 0 Aquarius. So there's all this kind of new emergence, you know, like from a more, I don't know, like symbolic delineation. The 0 degrees, the beginning, it's the initiation of something new, while the 29 is kind of like finalizing something. So really see this, there's just like these layers and layers of newness coming through with that, even with the ingress of Pluto and Aquarius, like starting on spring equinox, then coming through again with the sun at 0 Aquarius conjunct, you know, Pluto. Just find that really poignant.
Yeah, I feel that, Elodie. And it's, since we're dealing with a planet that takes, I mean, it takes a while to go through each sign and to do full cycles, you know. If we think in the long-term time-based type of thing, yeah, it's like, okay, Pluto's going to enter in Aquarius, then go retrograde, do this thing. It's like, okay, it's like a year and a half of going back and forth, but it isn't that long of a time in the bigger scheme of things. So to have overlap, it's interesting. I think this is for those who are studying astrology or into astrology. Sometimes we have dates that we use, you know, like, okay, a planet or goes into a sign or goes into a space. And sometimes we see it right on that day. But a lot of times in astrology, stories are overlapping. Cycles are overlapping. And so what you said, Ellie, like layers. So, you know, to see walking through a door, but also you're still coming out of the door behind you. And so stories like this, they overlap. And I think it's important to remember this because sometimes we're like, you know, I'm like, listen, I earlier talked about how psyched I am for this transit. I mean, will we see something blatantly obvious? Maybe. But a lot of times here in the next year and a half till November of 2024, it'll be like these little intertwining stories of goodbyes and hellos of Pluto and them overlapping and shifting off of each other. To go on what you said about 0 degrees and like 29-degree anaretic, these are total PowerPoints. It's amazing this is happening during the equinox at 0 degrees Aries point. If anybody who does deeper research in mundane astrology knows the Aries point is huge in our history. They've always have certain types of mundane events that have happened that signaled major shifts in civilization. So you have that along with Pluto doing this movement for the next year and a half. And what I would tell people listening, watching, is to accept accept that there's overlaying stories, that it's complex, but also accept the inevitable, that there is no going back. There is no, you're going to go back and reflect, and you can't help but carry certain stories with you, but you got to walk forward, and the world's going to bring that to you anyway. So, start accepting it. The acceptance period, I think, here is the next year and a half. So,
well, and that's an interesting point, Nicholas, because one of the unique things about dancing in and out of Capricorn and Aquarius is that it's under the same domain of Saturn. So there is, I mean, they're completely different signs, but they still, function to this same ruler. And it's interesting that that ruler just happens to move into Pisces right before this ingress, which is breaking a streak of it being in its own domicile. But also to speak to this point of the 29 anaretic degree and the 0 degree, these power points and these transition points, and the fact that the primary part of this dance that will be done will be when Saturn is also transiting, the last sign of the zodiac, that is Jupiter territory, that has its own wrapping up, its own, full completion of a story, sign-based wise. And I just find that interesting to add to the couple of years and what that transition space could look like, too. So I just, any thoughts on the fact that Pluto will be on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction degree? Or is that a podcast in its own?
Well, I think again, like I was saying, it's like when delineating Pluto and Aquarius, people are putting all of the significator of the air period into the Pluto and Aquarius, but I think it's important to make that distinction again. Like the advent of AI, I think, is not necessarily Pluto and Aquarius. I think it's more related to the air period. But because the air period is being initiated with such a huge shift with Pluto and Aquarius, like a more minor one than the 200-year air period that we just entered, we're kind of confusing the two. But the fact that it happens on the conjunction point, again, it's kind of just like the subtitle of the novel of this 200 year air period that we've just entered.
Yeah, it's like the opera that just started. Is like sometimes the part of a story in opera, they'll throw the Pluto stuff later.
But the opera starts with that, like with Pluto. Exactly. Yeah. Like
it's like the opening scene is someone dying, and it's like this dramatic.
There's an abduction. There's someone dying. There's an abduction.
But is it a deep fake though?
Yeah, right.
Who knows? Who knows? Well, and that's such an interesting part of this. We're only going to get this taste of in 2023 of March through June of Pluto barely being there, but at the same time, we get the opening square of Jupiter squaring Pluto from 0 degrees of fixed sign. So it does have this dramatic entrance. And if anything, maybe there's a blessing to having Pluto and Aquarius at this time as we enter this much longer air age, because let's bring all up to the surface what needs to be dealt with ahead of time so that we can actually maybe make something of integrity out of this period, rather than finding out later of all the, the corrupt or bad ways to go about things that we have to fix after the point or fact, rather than like, let's fix it all first and like actually benefit from what comes after. And,
I love Pluto Jupiter. If you look at charts of Pluto Jupiter is just like, it's money. Not necessarily like money, but
it kind of is.
There's something really, really, it's one of the best aspects. I was looking at Mick Jagger's chart the other day, and he has Sun, Pluto, Jupiter in Leo conjunct the IC. And I was like, wow, that's powerful. Yeah. It's so powerful. Pluto, Jupiter is just so rich. So that opening square, I think, is really interesting. What I'm dreading is when Saturn is going to be in Taurus and we're going to have Pluto square Saturn, Taurus. That's when I think it's going to get kind of more crunchy.
Absolutely. Big part.
And which is the end of this decade. Uranus is in Gemini by then, and we know what that means, but we can get into that later.
Yeah. But it's good to here, because we started talking about this as a story and opera, and Pluto's right out there in the forefront, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's good that you're bringing the Jupiter element into this, so just so people aren't completely freaked out here in the beginning. Like that it's not as, like you said, crunchy as like Saturn Pluto is going to be. That there's something about Jupiter Pluto that, obviously when we have the outer planetary bodies, and they're relating to the inner bodies, the more traditional bodies, this is where we see stories actually play out in front of us. We see the subconscious play out consciously within ourselves and in the outside world. So this is a benefit, Jupiter, to look at it that way. And actually, if you want to utilize it and have a certain type of in the beginning of a Pluto transit like this, to have some sort of vision that's involved of what can be, not for just for yourself, but what can be for all of us. And that's how I look
very
at
Aquarian.
Totally is totally
as you are, Nicholas.
As I am. I got major Aquarius planets.
Yeah, for all of us, that was a good speech, yeah. Aquarian speech.
Can't forget.
The opening square with Jupiter and Taurus, I think, is a story of wealth. It really much, we're talking about wealth. And just the transformation of wealth. What does it mean? Everybody's in debt. What does even money means? What is the new systems that are trying to be implemented? How does wealth work? Like the inequalities, all that. That's the story of Pluto, but even more so Jupiter and Taurus and what's happening in Taurus. So this opening act, I would think of it as wealth, not necessarily money, but
yeah.
Like on a personal level, like what do we have?
Yeah, you're talking about what do we have, that we're not talking about wealth, but what do we have and what do we value, in a sense, reflective in our values and what we have within us and around us too. What's reflected even materially, sometimes it could show into what's even in your room or whatever of wealth, what is of most importance here. So, and I think too, like, we had some prepping of this too with Uranus being in Taurus. Now you have some other heavy hitters coming in here to see, obviously one's going to look at themselves, but then this is where we start incorporating each other, everybody else, I think too. But I definitely agree with you about the quote unquote wealth, not necessarily money, but what is of worth.
Yeah.
Well, and I think money too. I mean, honestly, we're going to talk about the age of the revolution, and that was a big thing, like, and we're bringing the egalitarian and the what is equal to everybody, and middle class structures, and there's a big divide of people in power and money. And so talk about starting our opera off with a bang, so to speak. It's an interesting time, that whole coming here in May, right around when Gemini season starts, because we're going to have that square from Jupiter to Pluto, and then Mars is going to move into Leo and create a T-square with all that. And so if you want an introductory to some big themes that are going to come up, look to that the middle to end of May, as far as these themes being activated. But let's start to go, because we have so much that we could potentially talk about. Let's start to go into the past a little bit with Pluto and Aquarius. What are we working with? And the past is the past. There's always different nuances, especially planetary speaking. There's different potent combinations of planets at play, but we can get some themes, I think, with Pluto and Aquarius. And so just going back in the common era, we have had Pluto in Aquarius from 1777 to 1798, from 1532 to 1553, from 1286 to 1308, from 1041 to 1063, 795 to 819, 550 to 574, because everyone knows what was going on back then. 305 to 330, and then the 60 to 85. So we've had, in this common era, we've already had 8 different periods. So this will be the 9 since the turnover of modern times. But one that we obviously remember or have documented the most of is the last one, 1777 through 1798. And this is the age of the revolution. You know, we had the American Revolution, we had the French Revolution, we had the Haitian Revolution, which was the biggest slave revolt and most successful. And so, yeah, revolution. What do you guys think as a theme?
That's the interesting thing about Aquarius, because obviously traditionally Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and then modern astrology attribute Uranus. And I think obviously I personally don't attribute outer planets to the signs, but we can see here a sort of parallel with Uranus, with the revolution aspect. Because if you look at Aquarian people, a lot of them are actually very conservative. There's so many conservative politicians that are Aquarian. So why is it that there's revolution during Pluto and Aquarius? Well, we're talking about Pluto. So, you know, there is kind of this disruptive, like destructive, because Pluto is about destroying to be reborn better. So it's easily confused with like, oh, let's rebel for the sake of rebelling. But I think with the Aquarian, you know, it's especially with Pluto, it's like destroy the status quo to build it better, like for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember too, when we talk about political events, or let's say what we might think is gonna happen, that it is working regardless of political parties in the sense. I mean, it's reflective in groups and sides that people take, right? But astrology doesn't pick sides.
Yeah.
It doesn't pick sides, and so this is where one has to step out and look objectively of how things, if we're talking about transits like this. And so they're saying that, but I like what you said, Elodie, about making the distinction like Aquarius, because it can be put in the category like Aquarius is going to be autonomous and differentiate itself from what's normal. They're not typically, the Aquarius energy is standing in the normal line of people, and at some point just can't deal with it anymore, and just has some sort of moment where it breaks off from the normal line, and it needs to be on its own path, on their own way, right? And so I could see how some people are going to attribute Uranus to something like this, to like in the modern way, but it isn't because that breaking off of one path is not just breaking off, it's a construction of one's own path individually. And that's why Saturn rules that sign.
Yeah, you know? And it stems from alienation often. It's like it begins with alienation.
Yeah, it's cold. We're talking about cold, alienation, and air sign, and it does what happens here in the breaking off. But first, you're absolutely right. It starts off with some sort of casting out or breaking off because of alienation, finding oneself alone within a structure or a group or something. Which supposedly you're not supposed to be feeling alone when you're sitting with a group of people, let's say, right? But when you're not really aligned with the code of those people or the group or whatever it is, you're sitting alone. It actually feels more alone probably to be in the group of people in that way than actually being alone. Yeah. So anyway, to go back to what you said about making the differentiation of like what Saturn does, what Uranus does, you know, and how things get attributed to Aquarius. So to go back though to what you said about Pluto and these times of revolution, I think is when we come back to the actual corruption of things, and Pluto's first forms of showing itself is corruption. And so this will show itself regardless of political parties. People have views, and you see it now. You see it actually now in the United States. You've seen people from the right, far right, or whatever. They look at government as corrupted. You're going to talk to the left or other parties or whatever. They're going to say the same thing, just in a different way. It's a different thing. So in a sense, if we step out from even that, there's corruption going on. That's for sure.
What you were just saying about being alone and feeling alone and not relating, I was like, that's the experience of social media that everybody's having right now. Yep. You've just put your finger on it. Like, it's just, and so maybe, and I know we're just in the historical section, but it just really was, I was just like, yeah, oh my God, everybody's feeling alone. We're just like all connected, but everybody's just like in their little circus.
I think what you said, Elodie, though, is connected to politics, actually, because if we were to go back to look at what happened in the Haitian Revolution, French Revolution, American Revolution, you know, for the times of how people were relating to each other and what they were using to communicate with each other, it got to a certain point, obviously, of things were polarized, right? Yeah. And people get together and they find ways to come together en masse to change something. And I don't think I think that's been happening in modern times, in our time now, with Pluto and Capricorn, and here we are in Pluto and Aquarius. I think that alienation you're talking about with social media, even though we're binded together constantly, that we think we're together in that rapid time movement that I mentioned earlier, we're constantly engaged with each other. It feels like we're together, but we're not. And in places like this, of that alienation you're talking to in these tech times, I even think that the depth of aloneness, the depth of like how one is feeling casted off, is such an illusion in general, because in other times you see it face to face organically with people in your community. Okay, but here we seem like we're connected, but we're not. And I think something that will stem from this, and that what's happening is it's I think innate in human beings to rebel, to branch off when they are alienated. It's just we've never seen it this way before. But nothing's changed. You know, people were alienated during the French Revolution. We have a major class system based thing. It happened in the American Revolution, which, you know, based first off of the history of America, people coming over here because they were cast off in England. And then basically we can bring in the slave trade, because that's really what the United States is all about. And people casting off and separating and so on. And so, you know, we're dealing with power in the end. But I want to say, you know, that we're repeating things again. It's just in the most weirdest illusionary form of like, because we seem to be fully connected, but we're not. I mean, I
think we are fundamentally, though.
Fundamentally, I think organically we are.
Yes.
I think organically we are. So,
but to go back to the revolution time, you know, the French motto that came out of the French Revolution is liberté, égalité, fraternité. And fraternity is such an Aquarian word. It's just like this. I feel like Aquarian is the most human-centric sign. It's the sign the most focused, like on humanity as a whole. It's like if Leo, the opposite, is about like the ego of the person, Aquarius is the ego of like the human family or something.
Well, and I think that's going to be a big part of Pluto and Aquarius, and the themes that come up is the good of all, to the good of all, because that, you know, that's kind of the driving point, especially the age of revolution, is, you know, being very under the thumb of the power structures. And, you know, whether it's the American Revolution and still being trying to be dominated by power across the seas from multiple countries. It wasn't even just, you know, the English. It was the English, it was the French, it was the Spanish, it was the Dutch, you know. But why is this looming sense of power trying to affect me locally? You're not here. You're not in it. You're not part of the community. You know, like, why would you hold any power in something that you're not necessarily a part of? And so I think that's an interesting part, especially to go back to what Nicholas was saying about being alone and this social media and being connected to everybody, but we're not. We're connected to these corporations and these, you know, I mean, I was on Facebook yesterday. I got to a point where I was just scrolling. Didn't need to be scrolling, but I was scrolling. It was just ads. It was sponsored. It was suggested. It wasn't a single one of my friends.
I know.
And I got plenty of friends on there, and it wasn't a single one. And then the same thing with like being like a musician and being such a part of, you know, working in record stores for years. And the coming together of music and community and finding things out and being a part of something locally, like that doesn't exist anymore because there's nowhere to gather. There's nowhere to have that fraternity, you know, like locally. And so I think this sort of local dynamic is going to be have a resurgence, so to speak. And the same with the power component with wealth that we were just talking about earlier with, you know, Jupiter and Pluto. But that was a big thing with the French Revolution, right? You know, we're here, this is these upper class and the royalty. Well, what about us people down here? There's this huge gap and we're not going to take it anymore, you know. And it was this time period that the middle class was essentially being created. And, you know, something we'll talk about a little later in the program is, you know, the threat of the middle class now, after this whole cycle has, you know, gone through, and the gap's getting wider again. So these, yeah, I think the community component is really big, at least in my mind.
That's the weird thing with social media. I think it's a great equalizer because we're frequenting online people from all social class, and it allows us to see people. Like, I have friends who are punks and like dumpster diving, and then I have friends who lives in the hills of Hollywood and only goes to fashion show and party all the time. And you just, every day you're like kind of exposed to like all of this different thing. People like collecting money because they need like surgery and they're broke, versus like this like excessive wealth in like the fashion industry. It's just one example, and like these high-end restaurants stuff. So we're just literally seeing it all like equally on our screens. And I think that's really alienating, because it seems that like you can make it, or you can be more comfortable, or you can be on vacation. Like, why is everybody's having fun? And even though we know like social media is just a mirage, like we're still, it's just a reflex. We're just like, why am I hustling? Why is this bullshit? Why am I seeing people on the beach? Like, you know?
Yeah, you seem like you're on equal terms with the person you're seeing on the beach. Like you're there with them, like they're, oh, you're like us, we're just alike. But I think, you know, I think what's interesting here is you brought up social media and Facebook, you brought up the music world, and we're talking, and we're bringing up French Revolution, the American Revolution, and all these things that have the common thing about independence or something new that came in, something like Facebook. An example that was new before it had ads, before it everything, it felt completely like we were sharing in this certain type of way. Eventually became corrupted. You can look at the music world, same kind of thing. Oh, blah blah blah, we're sharing what music used to mean. Technology came in, it actually seems to cool. Eventually people were stealing music. Eventually record companies stopped signing people. The whole industry changed. It became corrupted. But the base premise ideal when these things came into play were actually based on that community-based thing. Like the ideal, it started off there. But if we're coming to look at now as an example, you see the poison and the corruption that's happened. But it did start off in that Aquarius connective community-based way, where everyone has a fair shot. Everyone has a fair shot. Not only they have a fair shot, you get to be your individualistic self in that space.
Exactly.
But people, this is what people do. Not all people. We all do it in some sort of form. But what people do, and when I break down people now, with people with the cash and the power, they're not stupid. They see something like this, not only do they capitalize, they take control and manipulate. You know, and that, whether someone, I don't care if anybody agrees with me or not, but that's what's happened. We have the ultimate manipulation game going on with the premise and the facade of we're together.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not. So again, that's not exactly American Revolution, French Revolution, but if we think about those times of where people got to a place of like, actually, this is BS, this is illusionary, this where we get the scraps and it seems like we're together with you while we eat the scraps and you're up there eating something else and drinking something else. We're doing this, but sometimes you throw us a little bit of something and it feels like we're on the same equal plane.
But we're in a consciousness prison. We're literally in a prison within the social media realm and the virtual world.
Yes.
it's a confined space. You know, we're like, oh, well, we can make money. I have to hustle online and all of that. But I think it's a prison without bars. And there's testimony for that.
Yeah. We find ourselves in that container now, you know?
Yeah.
It's
and that's what you're speaking of, I think, speaking on. Like, people grab the power and do what they wish with it. And now we find ourselves compulsively, because there's so much that results from, you know, people manipulating these structures online and our consciousness. It creates like the social repercussion, the way people vote politics, like happening on Twitter, like politics happening on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, so it is actually a huge deal. It's just that it's not happening physically, it's happening with our consciousness, and
it's right in here too. It's this thing, you know. And if we look at something like the French Revolution, which basically, because it was basically a structure that got to a point with a feudal system, it was the feudal system that was happening there, and things got so bad, there was a change, you know. Not saying it's the same thing, but in a sense of like, if in our minds and how we think we are, what we portray ourselves to be through our avatars, through our profiles, whatever, but the corruption and major corporations kind of setting that up, we think we're free. We think we're free, but it is actually a feudal system. You know, TikTok, you got billions of people on there, but how many articles you see every month and a half that they admit somehow it comes out that they're picking which video takes off.
Oh yeah,
when
totally.
When they choose
absolutely.
to. When they choose to. And
influencers feed the algorithm.
Yeah, we don't. Is it truly equal? Do we really have the chance just like everybody else, right? So so that's a mind thing, and I'm, you know, trying to show the connection too of like caste system, feudal system that happened with these revolutions, because that's basically what happened there. It's just, you know, when we're talking here, I think it's of the mind. It's in here, you know. And then you find yourself in the physical world deteriorating physically, or you can't go to the doctor, you can't do whatever, but in your mind you think you have this serotonin hit, or you feel like you're being seen because you got a bunch of likes or certain things, but it's like a false thing. Okay, now I think we're like ranting against social media.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah,
here.
we're sorry. Trying to find the connection.
Another slide to go on.
Yeah, we're trying to find the connection. I was trying to find a connection to these revolutionary things, like the you know.
So 2 books that were written last time Pluto was in Aquarius: the 120 Days of Sodom by Marquis de Sade. You know, so like 120 Days of Sodom. Anyway, it's, you know, so you can look it up. And then also Dangerous Liaison, which is a French novel, which is basically 2 lovers that turns rivals, and they amuse themselves at ruining each other's life. Basically, there's a movie on it, a French movie, but that happens all in the context of a French Revolution. And it's all class stuff and the corruption of the nobility and all of that. So that's 2 books that I found that were written last night.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we have another book that was written that was quite a groundbreaking change in how we view life here on Earth, I guess what we could say, is in Pluto and Aquarius. In the time before, in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus had released on the revolutions of heavenly spheres. Actually, the year that he died, it was released like literally like a month before he died or something like that. It was but it was groundbreaking. It eventually changed our whole thought from a geocentric system where, you know, the Earth just stood still and everything revolved around us, to the heliocentric model, which we have today, which some people might even still argue. But they're, you know, knowing that we revolve around the sun. So talk about changes in mass thought and concept. That's
2 more
pretty
books.
Fascinating.
3 books of occult philosophy. It was written in 1533 by Agrippa. So, and then Nostradamus, the prophecies of Nostradamus also at that period, because the air is also always interested in compiling. You know, the air element, the Aquarian element is like the compilation of information. I actually did like a research project, just air period publication, and it seems to be always this kind of grabbing of all these concepts and doing a synthesis of things. So
yeah, there's another book that came out the same year that is on that same premise, and that was Andreas Vesalius. Well, he published the book The Fabric of the Human Body, which was the first to have accurate diagrams of the human body, and it was the start of modern anatomy. And what's interesting about it's like, why 1543? Well, right in the earlier part of this year, right before both Copernicus's book and this anatomy guy's book, there was a solar eclipse conjunct Pluto in Aquarius.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
talk about
amazing.
it is like just this forefront of thought coming forward and compiling all together, that's and look where we are now because of just these two beginning moves, and what you had mentioned as well.
Yeah, I mean, 3 books of occult philosophy is
huge.
Trending.
It's trending. It's trending.
It's trending.
Exactly.
The last 10 years of those of us in the astrological community, occult communities were separate. It's come back. Everybody's doing their elections. Not everybody, but it's trending. And I thought it was interesting, the words that you both used, compiling of information to synthesis. You basically look at the constellation. When you see the drawings of the constellation of Aquarius, you see the jug. The woman, sometimes it's a man, holding the jug of water and they're pouring it back on planet Earth. I mean, on a basic level, basically, the water that's in the jug is knowledge. It's the stuff that was compiled by Aquarius pretty much and brought into their lab and synthesized into something else. And then it's put in there and it's poured back on planet Earth. That's where you get the humanitarian concepts of things, of just sharing what is progressively new or was been compiled and synthesized into something else, refined in a sense, crystallized, if we think, I'll use those words because of Saturn ruling Aquarius. And so that knowledge, that stuff gets poured back. So I found it interesting that the words that you both used, and we're talking about timing, about Agrippa. And I also think it's interesting, too, that this Heavenly Spheres book, because what Copernicus was doing, it took a long time for it to get in. This is heresy from the church. This is a pure rebel move that happened. And it took almost 100 years for this to become actually reality.
Yeah, he went to jail.
He went,
basically.
And people were getting killed for believing in this stuff and talking about this.
Yeah. Well, Galileo went to jail.
Oh,
Copernicus didn't. This is the irony, actually, because I went down this rabbit hole a little bit because he had died right before, and he had held on to this for a while because he didn't want to stir up anything because he had worked for the church. So he wasn't, they were all actually about his ideas, but it wasn't until Galileo and a few other people kind of came in like 1616 and then 1633, and that stirred up the pot.
Yes.
But what was fascinating about that was that pot, when they were finally like, oh no, we're not about this and we're going to lock you up because of it. That's when Pluto was in Taurus and squaring these positions that are now, which I thought was kind of fascinating, where it's like, no, hold on, we're not, well,
we're getting the Aquarius Taurus stuff this whole decade. Because Saturn entering Taurus is going to really trigger that again. We're going to really.
So we've already had the precursor, right? With Saturn Uranus.
Yeah.
So
I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more compiling to go on to our theme at this time too. There was Gerardus Mercator, who was revolutionizing navigation and map making at this time too, and was making better navigational tools and maps, which probably led to the further conquerings and of the globe and where we're going. So just another example of compiling thought after working on things for a long time and disseminating that to others.
Yeah, I just to come back really quick, I won't spend too much time because about Copernicus, this revolution of heavenly spheres I think is interesting because of what was proposed. because humankind was in the middle. And when this whole thing changed everything afterwards of how we as human beings separated ourselves and took an objective view, we stepped out of the center point and looked at everything from an outside point of view, which in a way it deals with how humans have gotten to be with scientific thought. Like, you separate yourself from something to analyze it, right? And, you know, to me, that separation again has come up with the Aquarian archetype. And also the more logical, objective, now we could say scientific view of things by separating ourselves from something, you know, and basically that's a big part of the concepts there, whether he was thinking that, or whether he was thinking that or not, that's what's happened mechanically with what he wrote. And ever since then, if you look at history, the acceleration of what's happened with history, the Industrial Revolution, big part of this, and then we got scientific revolution and how things accelerated because of it. Now, I won't say anything else to that, but I will say that I think it's gone too far. So
we'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So
we'll get into that. Now, another thing that was happening during that time too, which is big, with there seems to be this theme also with Pluto and Aquarius of separations of religion, which religion is just group thought, right? You know, to some extent, you know, we all assign to this belief of some sort. And that was Henry VIII and the Protestant Reformation, because you know, literally when Pluto ingressed into Aquarius was when Anne Boleyn was pregnant, about to give birth, and they got married right during that switch of the 29-degree to the 0-degree Aquarius. And Henry was all like, he was all about the Catholic Church. Like, he was the great defender of the faith. He was given like that title, but once it did not suit him, and he needed to, you know, separate from his previous wife because she wasn't giving him a baby boy, you know, he basically separated from the Catholic Church and created the Anglican, you know, Church of England, and it created this whole and it wasn't even a new segue of thought. It was power. It was corruption. It was something that he wanted. He closed all these monasteries and redistributed the power and the land and the wealth there to people. And, you know, Anglican Church is still going strong to this day. And so we see this kind of division for personal or power use that started this. So I thought Henry was an interesting character.
Does it have to do with Luther's Bible? Because I was looking through like the 1530, like that era, and it seems like all of these Bibles get rewritten.
There were a lot of Bibles that got rewritten around a little bit later in the period, and then I think maybe even to the Pisces period too. Henry was a little bit different, because what he did was he was just like, I'm creating a whole different church, but he did what was known as conservative reform, which is also kind of Aquarian, to the Saturn side of Aquarius, right? Where he didn't really change anything. He just needed to make a different faction where he was not under the Pope, so that he could do what he wanted and have divorces and kill wives and etc. But there were a lot of rewritings, or in the Bible was placed into translated into English for the first time during this time too, which was an important part.
Wow, that's so huge, actually.
Just a little bit, you know, just a side note. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's that time too. It's the same that goes along with the Protestant Reformation that was going on. Because I'm not the biggest historian, but when I looked at what was happening in France, I think it was I have it here. John Calvin was like a major proponent pushing the Protestant Reformation, and again there's this clash going on with the, you know, Catholic Church, and them going back and forth at each other, you know. And so, but what you just said about the Bible being printed in English, part of me would thought I wish that never was printed in English.
Yeah, seriously.
Anyway, so,
Well, and
real.
so, well, and I think this is going to be a big part of this whole transit that we might not see overtly right away, because there is this theme of religion and how it influences the power of the people and the politics and the divisions there, right? Because if we pull back to another period of 1054, the Great Schism, like this is a huge deal in Christianity, because this is where the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox breaks off. And these are like the two main branches of Christianity and thought. And this is where all Christianity basically had a dividing line that created the factions, that then it's created the factions that came later with the Protestants and the Anglicans and the, you know, all the people in the Reformation in the last period we talked about. There were different proponents, either more rebellious people like Calvin, like you were just talking about, and then there's the people like Henry that aren't really rebellious. They're not trying to change that much. They're just trying to get what they need out of it. And yeah, the Great Schism was, it created the two huge denominations through an excommunication that took place, because the main deal with it had to do with the written word and how it was translated. It was translated this way. I don't agree with that translation. I'm translating this way. I don't agree with that translation.
We see a lot of that already emerging,
right,
in the astrological community.
Yeah, I know, right? Yes, 100%, 100%.
Well, you actually too, in at least here in the United States, even from the conservative realm. Now, when I say conservative, this can be broken down in different ways. There's the old school American conservative. There's the neoconservative, whatever. But a lot of what they do, whether they believe it or not, always have had a religious undertone into what they do together as a party or in groups. And even even now, you're seeing certain types of factions within the conservative party that aren't so extreme, and they're actually, in a one way, have their way of following the word of the Bible and how they take their actions. And then you have the more extremist views that we've seen here in the United States, especially come up in the last 5 or 6 years, where they're in the forefront showing that the Bible means this, and the actions that they're taking are really extremist and alienating and deal with violence, actually, and using anything in a sense to back up. We'll do whatever it takes because the Bible says this and we believe that. And there's other people in the conservative party that actually don't think about it. They're taking a different view, and then it could step out of just conservative party of people dealing with religion, and whether it being Catholic in this country and the other parts of the religion, how they deal with humanity and humanity's troubles. So you have a part of them that take the one route of like, this person is hurting, we take care of them. They're houseless, we take care of them. You got another part that's quoting the Bible saying they need to they're houseless, they're this and this, let's eliminate them. They're using those words. They're using those words when it comes to queer people, to trans people, to anything that is against their view. So anyway, I just want to say, and I think we're going to see this more in the United States, where religious people are actually going to be, they're already doing it on the internet, but they're actually going to be fisticuffs because of like what the Bible says and what the word is and what it means. And they're going to say, no, it means this. And they're going to say it means that. And not only that, and I'll be done with this, there's a shit ton of cash in the middle.
Oh yeah.
You know, we're looking at he rebelled against the church because of Anne Boleyn. She must have been beautiful because he's like, I'll do anything. But I don't think it's just that, you know. And I think even with the separation with the Orthodox Church, there is a ton of assets and there's a ton of money and power that's involved too, besides the philosophical end of things, you know. So I actually see it playing out now, I know, within the United States. And I think it's going to be a major focal point I'm sort of predicting here, but to go back to how we started talking about this, about the schism and separation within religion. So
Yeah,
I think that's also, and it's a bigger story than just Pluto and Aquarius. So
yeah, it probably is.
Yeah, just like division in religion. I mean, it's basically what creates war.
It is, but it's interesting how these particular divisions, at least under the Christianity side of things, seem to have taken place during these, of course other things are going on, of course and there's always these big switches with the Pope too, so keep an eye on what the Pope's doing, because there was another period where the Pope during Pluto and Aquarius moved to France and started the whole Pope in France rule during that time. And so there's always these major kind of switches and threats and divisions, and even Mohammed, the prophet, was born in 570 or 571, which was under Pluto and Aquarius too. So here we have this kind of Pluto and Aquarius person that builds this other faction of religion. So there's a lot of juicy religious stuff that seems to come up. So we'll touch on that later, I guess. But let's get into some of the things that we've already kind of been precursoring about, because we're in the changeover period, right? We've talked about this earlier, of Pluto going in and out of Capricorn and Aquarius in 2023 and 2024. And so we can dive a little bit more into the themes that are popping up in our collective right now. And of course, one of the major ones that seems to be taking play is artificial intelligence, right? Everybody talking about AI, whether it's art, whether it's this chat GPT that is writing copy for everyone. People scared of artificial intelligence, other people fascinated by it and think it's the answer for everything. What are your thoughts, people? What are your real thoughts?
Actually, this isn't real me. This isn't real me. This is my avatar.
Yeah.
Everything I've said today was put in the chat GPT. So
yeah, when it comes to technology and stuff, I think again there's this overlapping with the air period we've just entered, and that's something obviously I didn't have time to do today, but looking at the previous Pluto and Aquarius period that were not necessarily happening during air periods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the advent of artificial intelligence, the virtual world, all this, I think that's symptomatic of the air period since the 80s, like the sort of first conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. If anything, I think, to go back to what Nicholas was saying earlier, it's more about kind of starting to witness the corruption and sort of the entrapment of these platforms. And the thing with Pluto, also, there's this kind of black and white thinking with Pluto. So these platforms are engineered, like when I say platform, I just mean like any social media, any places that we interact, because that's become like the collective discourse is happening. Nobody can escape it now, really. But they're engineered to polarize to keep us engaged. So this polarization, even religious or political polarization and stuff, that's happening because these platforms are engineered that way. So, but as people start to realize how much of a hold they have on their consciousness, and like I bought an app to block my app so that I can work, because I'm so compulsively checking all of my message that I can't work. And this is not something that I can actually control. I had to buy an app to block, and I block it, and I can't actually unblock it. It's just blocked. And I put a timer, because otherwise I can't function. I can't function. And I'm sure, and I existed before social media. So all of the younger generation who exists within the social media don't know anything else. Like, how compulsively attached are they to their apps and their platforms and their messaging?
You said a lot there. Interesting, because you're using artificial intelligence to help you separate. I'm not saying it's completely AI, but you need an app, right? Okay, that's one interesting element. The other thing is you have a generation who doesn't know. How do you know when you're hypnotized? How do you know when you're seduced? You don't know. I use hypnotize and seduction because it's Pluto. There's that other side of Pluto. The obsession, the seduction, the hypnotism. You ever run into a Pluto person or have a Pluto experience with something or someone? You only know it after what really, you're
every day.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
living it every day.
Yeah. I think all three of us know this.
Yeah.
So if we were to talk about like a certain generation, you don't know what something else was, and you don't know that you're seduced. And it's just artificial intelligence. That's what they're calling it. It's just normal. It's normal, right? Or it's becoming normal.
Absolutely. And that's part of the opera we're in. And the opening act, I think, is kind of the merging of our consciousness with artificial intelligence, which is happening under Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah. Which supposedly, okay, you enter in the query into some chat app or whatever this is, and it's pretty much compiling. Mentioned this earlier, different compiling of thing. It's compiling everything we've done as human beings on the internet that's on there, and it's compiling it and doing it, and it's outputting. In a sense, we have fed this. It comes from us.
Yeah.
It's not fake. It is, but it does come from us.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just be real about what that is. But as for the I'm trying to be objective here about my opinions about this, but I think part of what this opening salvo of the opera that we're talking about is this integration and how seducing that it is, because it saves us time. It could do this for us. It can do that. But if we think about why we need something like this to give us the break with time, because supposedly we don't have any, it's almost in the sense of like, what's the byproduct then? Is it because so we can get back to being more in tune with our organic selves and use time that way, the way we used to be? Or does the byproduct, we even separate it even more because we don't even want to lift a finger to do anything because some AI model or a chat thing is going to do it for you? Right. And I think that's part of what's happening, what will happen. It's like, which way do you go? Not to make it so binary and polarized, but it kind of is that way. It's like, which way does it go? Or what does one choose? What path do they choose?
And Pluto has an initiatory quality. So we're being initiated into these.
Yep.
Well, and I think you brought up a really good point, Nicholas, about the fact that we've fed it. We are the artificial intelligence, right? Because we're only at the point of artificial intelligence right now that's known as like narrow AI. And that's what we have kind of programmed into it versus general AI, which is what they're going for, and some people don't even think is even possible to have basically AI consciousness. But we've been feeding it. If anything, it's telling us a lot about ourselves. Because one of the things with like Microsoft put out this was like a few years ago, they did like a Twitter for an AI bot, and they had to shut it down within like 24 hours because it went racist, and it was saying all these crazy things about Jewish people, and but that's the thing, is it was feeding it. Or for another example of one of the big things we use of AI now is going through resumes, and people always say like, do this to your resume or make it like this or stand out there. You don't want to stand out because you're going through an algorithm that's picking out things, and they're noticing that they're picking out certain people because that's deemed more, what they're looking for or and it's not fair, and but it's trying to make things easier, right? Who wants to look at 5 million resumes that come in? Let's get a bot to do that because it's supposed to make our lives better. Same with the algorithm, right? Throw it in the algorithm. You give people what they really want to see. You're making their life better. But are we making our lives better is the question here in my mind, because it's all under the facade of that. And the same with AI just in general. You think of things like the Open AI and how that company started a handful of years ago. And the whole thing was, this is an open system. We're doing this for the people. We all only have the good of humanity this is a nonprofit. Well, it became a for-profit. It changed this, it's done this. And it's like went from this Aquarian ideal of like, this is for everyone, to being like, no, we're going to monopolize on this. We're going to partner with bigger power, companies. And And then it's starting to create these problems. Like, you know, Elodie made a joke at the very beginning about the deep fake and where that could take us. So anyways.
Well, if we frame the next 20 years of Pluto and Aquarius and we talk to each other in 20 years, we'll be definitely, all of this will be integrated in our experience. Artificial intelligence, implants, like all of it. The technology is just going to accelerate and it will be integrated. In 2000, if we had said you're going to spend most of your days looking at a screen online, you're going to make your money online, we would have been like, not me. I kind of like I'm a tactile person, you know, I like doing things with my hands, like I'm totally like in my space, I like create. But look at that, 20 years later, here we are, like we're just moving deeper. So I personally, I think it's just going to accelerate more, and in 20 years from now, this will just be completely integrated.
So do we just accept the Borg and basically turn in, like, let ourselves in the algorithm? The reason why I'm saying this is because I think a big part of what's happening, and I think I'm making some predictions, but this Pluto and Aquarius, I think there's going to be a rebellion.
Me too.
I think that, and I'm personally saying this, like for me, I'm going to write my own captions. When I go on YouTube, I ain't BSing anybody. And because I can't help but me, like, and plus I got a bunch of Aquarius in my chart, the top of my chart. I see something that everybody's going to be doing. I might put my foot in the water, then I'm going to put a big F you out of it and go the other way. So I don't think I'm the only one. I actually think that there is going to be an organic movement, a movement that has to do with basic core human sensual or sense stuff. Part of it's sensual, hopefully. It's used that way. But I mean, getting back to our core, who we are organically, and it will be shunned upon. It will be whatever. But I don't think, I think there's going to be a crop of people, and I'm one of them, that is going to find ourselves rebelling towards a full-on integration where we're talking about AI here.
Well, enter in Saturn and Taurus.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. I think it's what we're seeing in Taurus. It's kind of like the anti, you know, and the reintegration also of the earth element in a more stable way, because we just exited the earth period, and the earth period saw the excess of like extraction and hierarchies and stuff. Now we can return to a more kind of balanced relationship with the earth element as we move into the air element. So people are going to seek the earth element as a pushback. So I completely agree with you. But I do think that there's going to continue to be this trajectory with technology, but it's going to force people to find these like really grounded, sensual, earthy experiences. Because the other thing, and I'm obsessed with this, it hasn't been that long that we have electricity as a human people and being exposed to this type of light. So it's going to change our physiology. It's changing us physiologically. We take for granted this, but it's only been 200 years, not even. And so the impact of being exposed to artificial light constantly and not being in the circadian rhythm of the sun and moon is so major in human evolution that we're probably transforming. So to be able to just return to our own circadian rhythm, that's why I put in the app on my phone. I'm waking up, I'm exposing myself to daylight. I'm trying to retain a little bit of autonomy on my own circadian rhythm, which is all the Taurus stuff, you know?
It's the autonomy you're talking about. Sun and moon, circadian rhythms, hormones that are getting way thrown off because of all that stuff, what's happening with human beings. Listen, we wouldn't have certain things if it wasn't for technology, good things. And here we are on the premise too of something, we're talking about AI and certain things because we found ourselves here. Somebody initially did it it was open to everybody. When the World Wide Web, as we call it, started in the early 90s, it was open to everybody. There wasn't any corporate influence. There wasn't any control. The intentions are good. Here we are again in this podcast talking about something for the whole, with an idea that was idealistic, that was future oriented, that was progressively to bring us something good for all of us, where then those things have been manipulated and controlled. And you cannot help but that's what parts of human society does. People will do that for control or whatever. And so, yes, I don't think it's inevitable, the integration that's happening. It's who's pulling the levers. And does anybody want to still keep living where someone's pulling the levers for you all the time?
Yeah. And I don't,
it's a thing where I think that type of realization is part of a transit like this. Now, do you turn it on its head? Do you turn the technology and the things that have been there that is inevitable? That's why I said at the beginning, do we just completely submit to it? I'm saying no, but do you use it, and can you turn it on its head? And can people for themselves and as a community turn it on its head for the good, for where it's not completely based on capitalism, where it decimates things? Middle class is already decimated. The people are going to be losing jobs because of Chat GPT. Yeah. People who used to be photographers, who used to create things, lost their jobs because of Photoshop. It's just inevitable what happens. And then, humans, they morph and mutate, and they find ways to keep going. But when you start to get affected physically in your mind, is it of benefit? And I think that's the question. Like that is the thing. But listen, I'm of the philosophy, and I think a lot of people out there, true knowledge, insight, intuition, everything is that sun and moon and your connection to it.
Well, I think Elodie brought up a really good point, and we're all riffing on it right now, because what does Pluto do? It exposes. What does it expose? Toxic byproducts, and I think that is a big theme that's going to come up here with everything that you just talked about, Nicholas, everything that Elodie just talked about, the toxic byproduct of all this.
Yeah, like the advancement for the sake of what?
Because we're still, biological creatures that are of the earth. We're, and the circadian rhythm is huge. I've been trying to get mine back in check too, just to live a quality life.
Yeah, because we're social creature, and this is the way we're socializing now, like mostly, even when we're socializing together, everybody's looking at their phone and all that. So that's just happening. But just like a positive Aquarian delineation.
Yeah.
Just because earlier I was looking through and I was like, okay, well, corruption of Aquarian themes, and the black and white extremes of that sign, because that's what Pluto tends to bring and whatever. And, we saw Saturn entered Aquarius, we're all in this together, but were we? No, not at all. And then cybersecurity, deep fakes, AI robots, it's all problematic. Like in LA, there's a huge protest coming up for those robots that are going to be using, like the police are using.
For the police, yeah.
Yeah. So, we're getting whiff of that Pluto and Aquarius and people rebelling. So that's good. Positive Aquarian Pluto and Aquarius delineation, I think better redistribution of wealth, hopefully, the end of hierarchical structure and like the awareness of wealth inequalities, but then people doing things, it becomes intolerable and perceived negatively in the general population, like mostly everybody's aware of it, which makes structures collapse. So that's a Plutonic experience. When I say this, we're all excited. We're like, yeah, the system needs to go. That's the implication of this are major. Like the healthcare system here in Canada is free, but you can't get in to see a doctor unless you have, if you have money, you can just pay private and go. But I take an appointment with my doctor for a CAT scan in last September, and I still haven't received an appointment. So,
oh, wow.
It's free healthcare system, but all of these big structures, people are just milking it. Everybody that works in these big structure, they're just taking as much cash as they want. The corruption at the government level is so big. Nobody has responsibility. And I do think the collapsing of these structure, the implications are super huge. Obviously, because then it's chaos, right? Then it's just a free for all. It's just, there's no, if there's no healthcare system, you have to take your health into your own hands. Mm-hmm. You really have to. And that the implications of that, and you see that on Instagram, people are just do this, do that, take this pill, blah, 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 you know? Because we're aware, like COVID just made us aware that like we can't rely on a system. We have to take our health in our own hands.
Absolutely.
Renting. But this is positive.
This is it, you know, well, it once again, it's bringing us back to a sense of autonomy.
Yeah.
Right. The autonomy versus being, you know, embedded in the system or having to abide by the system, especially if the system doesn't work, you know, like that's, that's the thing is like, are you just going to lay down and die because you can't get an appointment? No, you have to find other ways. You got to go back to traditional and folk.
Trade with others and create smaller communities and
back to the community element and the power of who's close to you there. And I think even just you talking about like the bigger government structures and like, you know, switching the slide to thinking about big tech and their power monopolies, but any power monopoly, it doesn't even have to be big tech. I mean, big tech's huge, obviously Facebook, Amazon, Google, but also the government within that and these systems that are just running off power and money and greed and not, you know, they've gotten so big within themselves that how is that helping the populace? How's that helping the earth? How is that, is it really better for everyone or is it better just for a few? And I think that's a big piece that
well, we talk
start
about climate. Yeah, we talk about climate change and all this and switching to like electric cars, but lithium batteries and just batteries in general for solar system or wind power are as problematic because the extraction of minerals comes from third world countries. These batteries have a 10-year life and then they're disposed. So it's not more ecological. So what's the incentive there? You know, you know, it's yes, the small people can make the change, but if the corporation don't make the change, then, you know, I bought tamarind pods at the grocery store here in the middle of March in Newfoundland in the North Atlantic. Why am I getting tamarind pods here? Like, why is there tamarind at the grocery store in the middle of winter in Newfoundland? I don't understand. You know, I have no power. I mean, I cannot consume the product, but the product's coming here and it's going to end up in the garbage. Argentinian shrimps are coming here and they're probably going to end up in the garbage because they're 50% off and then expire in the garbage. That these structures are huge. It's not like,
because we can't want everything all the time at the same time all around the year because we like there's an entitlement, you know, just as people. It doesn't matter what, you know, if you're at the very top of the food chain or at the bottom, there's this, we have lived this life, you know, because of globalization and trade and all that, where we think that we can have everything at any time of year from any portion of the world. And I think, you know, I've really never thought about it, Elodie, but you bring up a great point. Like, what good does that do? And why, or do we feel entitled to have to be able to, or maybe we don't even feel, it's like someone's like, oh, we can sell it to them, you know, and so we're going to ship it around.
But that's what I'm wondering in terms of like power to the people and the Aquarian sort of archetype is like people realizing that maybe smaller scale communities are more helpful and building smaller structure as these bigger structures collapse. Because I don't think it's not sustainable. Even Amazon right now, I think, is not delivering. It's kind of going down to a certain extent. So,
well, it's not working. The algorithm has pushed things to a certain point where you think things are efficient, or you're sourcing food from somewhere else, and it's supposedly it's because it's cheaper, and so on and so forth. But the algorithm doesn't know it knows logistically, technically what's going on, but the actual physical form of doing things and what the impact is on communities, it's not sustainable. It seems like it's more efficient, it's more cheap, it's more easy, blah, blah, blah. Thanks, algorithm. Thanks, technology. Thanks, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't necessarily, the byproduct is there. Now, I'm a believer of the solution of like local reinforcement and communities, people have to come to realizations of this, of like how they deal with their neighbors and community. And they have to take the step past of like, well, it's going to cost double if we do it that way. And so no one's going to take the step to do it with the communities because they can get it for 50% cheaper. But is it really of cheap? Is it really of worth? Like, are you really getting the deal? Because you might be getting a deal, but the byproduct of it is destroying local communities, local businesses, how people interact physically. And again, we're going back to a thing of like dealing with organic interaction and what happens there. So anyway, you got this slide up here because we're talking big tech's power monopolies. And I see Amazon, Facebook, Google, but it's in everything. It's in shipping routes all over the world, to dependence on China to do certain things. The whole world. So anyway, so yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I'm just coming from the point of view for anyone listening and watching that to try to take an alternative view of looking at what has become normal and what's become better for you and more efficient because of technology, but to try to step out and look at how it affects you personally, so you can make a call for yourself on whether this is sustainable for you. And if you see things that are not sustainable, and it's because of something was 50% cheaper, or because it was faster, it happened faster, or so-called easier, just take a step and look at that, because really in the end, it's not easier. Not to me, that's a personal opinion, but these are the types of things I think that happen when you're hypnotized or you're seduced in a certain way. Like we're talking about Pluto and Aquarius, but wherever Pluto goes and wherever Pluto interacts, eventually there is a moment where something bursts, where something that's been festering for so long completely, like a dam breaks. and everyone's going to have this moment in the Aquarius part of their chart with Pluto going through there at some point. But as for the world and as for communities and culture, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Positive thing is we have to remember with Pluto when we talk here about the power that can be reclaimed for yourself or for a group of people. That's part of the process if we were to follow the path through the underworld and let go of something that gave us power before but is not working anymore, and going through that death and rebirth process. If we do that as a person or as a culture or as a group, what comes out of that is something no other planet, no other circumstance could bring. It's only the circumstance that Pluto brings, and it's true regeneration, which is, to me, true power. So
yeah, well said. That's like, it's true. Pluto can show us where we're stuck, and I think we're, like I was saying at the beginning, I think we're kind of stuck in these virtual infrastructure, and that's hopefully gonna kind of mutate into other things.
Yeah, because obviously that's kind of what we were talking about with the whole impact of social media and the virtual structure. And thinking about, I like this slide just because it said, talking about the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, and someone did a video on how social media changes your mind, right? Because that's a big thing with just Aquarius in general, and all these Aquarian transits, is the whole collective thought process that goes in to all of this, and where we're at with it, who's controlling it. There's this whole idea of like brainwashing, overtly or covertly.
But it's mostly the algorithm now that's kind of controlling. But the algorithm is still programmed by humans, but the algorithm controls much of the cultural obsession that we have.
If we didn't have the algorithm and computers, and some of us know this because we lived without this, because I think us here come from a generation of the overlap that happened between analog and digital. So let's just have a scenario here where we don't have what we have now, no phones, no emails, nothing like that. And we went to the huge public square of where we lived. And there was something major going down. And we were all there, and we were, in a sense, interacting with a certain situation. Let's just say there was a trial going on. You brought up the Amber Heard thing and the Johnny Depp thing. So let's just say it was happening in that sense without the technology. What are humans doing in that area observing the trial? Humans, herd mentality, biggest percentage, they're going to start taking sides. It's inevitable what humans do, and then they take sides, and then what they do once they take a side, they're interacting. They're no, this person's right. No, this is right. Blah blah blah, and there's judgment calls being made. And so, in a sense, there's some forms of collective thought going on there. So, as human beings, we do this. This is what we do. But like, what do we do when we get to a certain point of a so-called decision or judgment being made? Is it done by consensus, or is it eventually done with someone who represents your crew, your space, and then they get together? We can look at a trial. There's a jury, right, that's supposedly representing different groups of people. And then they eventually, after weighing everything out on the different sides, they make the judgment. They make the call, right? It's just an overview of what humans do without the technology. So then we're going to bring in technology, and what's happened with this Amber Heard thing in TikTok, I'm not picking sides here, but you definitely see how the making the call or the judgment didn't happen. It happened formally in the courtroom, but let's be real. It was fully influenced by the algorithm and what people were saying and doing. Now, if we're in that town square and I'm walking there, let's say I'm Hermes in a certain way, and I know what I want to get and what I want. I know how to change the message to two people in that crowd, and they will repeat the message back, and it can be completely false, whatever, but I just manipulated the message to get the result that I wanted. And that's what human beings do too. So this Amber Heard thing, TikTok, the whole deal, the thing, that's what goes on. That's the deal. And it's like, something there is not working. Like it doesn't work, and it becomes detrimental to then are supposedly being and progressing as human beings. But again, I sort of went on a tangential thing about collective thought, but again, it comes back to like, who is pushing the buttons, who is creating the space where the collective thought is put into place, because they're manipulating it. So is there true collective decision making and collective thought? I think this is part of what's going to happen in this transit, is to see what that really means.
Yeah.
And so anyway, thanks. I went off on a thing there. Example,
well, there's power in the
yeah.
collective thought, right? And there's ability on positive side to change that. Like if we can get a majority of us on a certain wavelength, like there's they talk about that all the time. I don't know if they talk about that all the time, but yeah, like the having a million people meditate on something at the same time,
right?
Like the power. Yeah, you could have world peace if we could just get everybody to get their minds on the same wavelength, which I don't know if I completely subscribe to, but like there's just power in that. So where are we at?
And most people don't really want to think for themselves anyway. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. And we all think that it's other people, but we're all part of that for different things. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, when we're passively ingesting information, even if you don't agree, it's still having an impact unconsciously. And so, talking about the unconscious, because that's what a lot of the more modern takes on Pluto, when Pluto emerged was the emergence of psychology also. Mm-hmm. It's like, what is simmering in the collective unconscious ready to emerge in relation to like all of that, like that technology, meme culture, like TikTok, all of the you know, the 5-6 hours spent scrolling a day, life passing by, not enough time, just like hooked on dopamine and all of that stuff, you know. So I do think those are going to become like collective conversation in
Yeah, and
the
I
following
think
years.
you would hope for that, actually. I think, to go back to an example, I mean, you gave the example, like, what if we collectively meditated? Okay, you know, that's coming out of the 60s and 70s, really. But there ain't nothing wrong with thinking that or wanting that. And I think part of this is it's inevitable. This collective thought has always been there, and we got the technology, which is inevitable. It's like, but still, I think human beings, an individual and human beings, can make choices more than ever. It's obvious to make a choice and the intention about what to do collectively. And again, I think there is a mind revolution happening in will, and it has to do with the connection of mind into heart. It doesn't stay into mind. I am the most cynical person you can run into some of these days, but I'm basically saying that it's to have out there, to use a transit like this, to have hope and to look for ingenious ways to do things collectively, to make the shifts, to make the attempts. Maybe we don't see them immediately, but when your back is against the wall and you have nothing else, just like in those revolutionary times we talked about with France, the United States, the Haitian Revolution, that's what it gets to. It gets to these places. But can you make the connection and take your mind higher level and bring it back to your heart? And I'm a believer of this. If you come back to your heart, you're thinking for the good in general. Like you want to be in a good, loving space, you know. So I just want to let people know, don't give that part to yourself that is not going away. Don't let it ever go away. And that is a huge influence on collective thought. And even if we were to use technology like we're doing right now, what we do together, we can't alter things. We can make the change. So, you know, we've been talking deep and dark about social media and technology this whole time, but maybe we can use it to our advantage and really do something. That's the hopeful part of this podcast for me.
Yep.
I just thought I'd do that thing that, you know, since we started talking about this, you know, what we do.
I love that, because it's the part of the Leo. It's the Leo. It's the opposite, right?
Exactly what I was going to say.
The heart is coming from the polarity of Aquarius, but it reminds me also of the Wizard of Oz, like what is the name?
The Cowardly Lion.
The Cowardly Lion.
But they're also the Steel Man that's looking for
the Tin Man for the heart.
The Tin Man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I know. Why did we both go to the line? Oh, because we were talking about Leo.
Yes. But you're right. The Tin Man. It's like a robotic Tin Man.
The cold Tin Man. Just rusty.
That's actually, I like where we ended up here, because I, as a practitioner, as an astrologer, is always looking at polarity points, the opposite signs. So, you know, if we were to do that a little bit here, and actually, I think we get a little hint of it, actually, even though Pluto goes retrograde there, we have a Venus retrograde that's going to happen in June and pretty much go on in the fall. That's going to be hitting the other fixed signs. But just saying that, you know, the warmth and the generosity in the creative power that Leo has, where things stem from the sun, from the core, from the will, does not have to be separated. And, you know, is it, I think, an integral part of a Pluto and Aquarius transit. It's good that we got here, because we can't forget that, as to balance things out, to weigh things out, to even, in the sense, if we were looking for an alternative situation when we thought we were being alternative and progressive in our Aquarius ways, that actually the one we forgot about, the space we forgot about, was to go to the Leo place, you know, to balance things out. And so, and to go back to the thing of like stemming or standing in one's heart.
It's so good. I love that.
Well, and I think it's also perfect when we were just talking about Copernicus earlier, and how under a solar eclipse conjunct Pluto, you know, with the South Node in Leo at that time. And it literally brought us to be like, oh, you know what? This whole thing centers around the sun, centers around the heart, centers around the light and the emanation and the consciousness. And, you know, don't forget that, because if you do. Yeah.
Yes.
Nicholas, you have a south node in Leo and north node in Aquarius, and
Yeah, don't you?
I have
I
the
do.
south node in Aquarius and north node in Leo, so we have similar lessons.
We do. We
Perfect.
do.
But I started with alienation and going off grid 20 years ago. I continued doing the Aquarian thing, but I'm moving into my heart slowly.
I know you got a heart in there, Elodie.
It's
I know you
warming
do.
up. It's starting
I
to beat a little faster. It's pumping
But
that
it's true.
blood.
There's such a, obviously having the nodes informs my perspective of Aquarius Leo, but there is this kind of feeling so alienated, and that's the Aquarian stuff, and we've seen it with Saturn Aquarius, feeling so alienated and fed up and just like, I can't deal with humanity. We've seen everybody do this in the last 2 years. And then people coming together and feeling so warm-hearted, like when things started to open up again and people started like spending time again together, and just like, what is the most important thing, what matters, it's our
Connection.
connection to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're it's part of it, right? The heart, what if the heart pumped and pumped, but it had no arteries, nowhere to send the blood, like there's this system of connection that, and then if we're starved from it, it gets a little drastic out there. And so this ties into like what we were talking about with social media and kind of feeling alone, a little alienated, and where it gets us. So, right, we're at the start of this. So, I mean, I'm just going to cycle through just a few more slides. We'll go a little faster here because I know we're getting a little long on time. We already talked about the religious influence from the past and seeing like the different breaks there and power structures within religion. Of course, religion 1,000 years ago was way more powerful than it is today, but is it? Is it really? Like, it drives a lot of things under the belly and under the underlying, we don't see it as much, but if that's not Pluto, I don't know what is, right? Who's pulling the strings underneath? And we see it like, the NPR's main headline today was about like abortion pills being taken away because, just things like that. Because what does the church love to interfere with? Science, and I think that's going to be a big theme. More and more it's going to come up, and we'll see some.
You see it in the war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has got a deep connection to religion there, and they use it as a premise to why so on and so forth to attack there. You have a major things have been brewing up for a long time in India between religious factions there. You have it in the United States, like I mentioned. It's in Turkey. Turkey's been building on a certain type of religious outlook, whether they're truly there, but using it to hold control, and you go on and on with this stuff. But yeah, we should go. I guess we should go
but just saying, there's that. We'll probably see more of that theme. We talked about this a little bit too with the class structures and saving the middle class, which was created back in the last Pluto and Aquarius transit, and that division of wealth, and a reason for us to come together, right? Because who is the biggest point of the populace is the varying levels of the middle class, power in numbers. So I think that wealth discrepancy that we were talking about earlier with the big power plays, and what Elodie started out the conversation is when we're talking about Jupiter and Pluto with the wealth gap. So I think this is going to be big, is the weather changes, the atmosphere in general. What is static that is always above us? The atmosphere. It's very fixed air to me. Air quality. Aquarius is known as the coldest sign in the zodiac, and a lot of times when there's big Aquarius activations, we get like extreme cold, which we wouldn't think, with the global warming and everything's getting hotter, and maybe there'll be just more of a polarity between like the heat of the Leo summer and the icy cold of the Aquarian winter. But I feel like that's pretty dramatic for like airflows and atmosphere. I don't know if anybody else agrees.
I think too, part of this is, first of all, whether someone agrees that things are changing or not. You have people who definitely believe that there's things changing climate wise, and yet people who are not, they deny it. So there's that, and I think that's going to play out a little bit more. But there is something happening, and I mean, when you see Southern California get dusted with snow like it did last week in certain ways, multiple ways, people know this in different parts of the world. They know something's changing or has been changing. So I personally think that this issue of climate change is actually needs to get a little bit worse, but I actually think it's going to get better. And my reason is that the people who have been denying it are going to find a way that them and who their crew is a money-making opportunity. And I actually think that they'll get on board slowly with changing, or whether it's through regulation, certain things, laws that get passed through, where certain corporations had to adhere to certain things. The only whether they're going to adhere to it or not, that's part of it. The other part of it is certain people in power and corporations are going to realize a new avenue of money to be made, and they will walk that way, and all of a sudden they're on board with
Got to make that money, Nicholas.
Well,
That's the only way it's gonna change.
It's already happening, like the push to go to electric cars and things like that, and smart cities and things. But what I was getting at earlier is I don't think that is a solution. Personally, I do not think that's a solution. My partner has a solar business company, and the waste from the batteries, they don't know how to dispose from these batteries that have a 10-year lifespan. And also the lithium and all the components for these batteries are being mined by children in Africa, you know? So is it really truly better? I don't think so. We're just constantly being hammered that that's a better solution. I personally absolutely do not think it's a better, although I've been on solar panel and off-grid for 20 years. So I kind of know what I'm talking about, but I don't personally think it's, I mean, autonomy producing electricity autonomously is better than relying on the grid. That's not realistic, because there's a lot of people that are not in that, they can't. But I don't know that switching from, like, you know, what we're doing now to like, what are we going to do with all these batteries?
The extraction of them, what happens in Bolivia and South America and Africa, what's been happening. And also the Chinese government has been huge in investment in Africa. They're building roads and doing stuff to have access to land to extract all these precious minerals. And the byproduct of this is pretty nasty. I mean, we don't hear about it lately. No. Okay, I don't want to stay too negative, but if we were thinking about this transit of what it is, you know, again, I'm going to bring a little bit of a hope, is like, you know, what is going to be a type of thing that can come in and not produce the nasty and not have the byproduct, even though on the facade it looks like it's better than coal, right? For an example, right? So there's judgment calls that need to be made. But I hopefully we have several things that happen during this transit. Like it's happened in the past with Pluto and Aquarius stuff, with that sourcing of information, or those maps and trade routes that happen, the construction of some of those things to make the world keep going in a certain way. I don't think anything's ever perfect. There's always going to be byproduct, but can something weigh a little bit more on the upper positive end of things than super poison? And
super poison.
Yeah, but it's like you get to a point though. How can the world or culture and society avoid poison and corruption? You can only avoid it so long when it actually starts to affect your physical body, affect how crops are being grown, everything else. It's like something has to shift. If not, I mean, we're talking about the ultimate Plutonian story, but something has to shift. If something isn't discovered or invented, which I think that's where one places the hope, I think it goes back into like how we interact with our local worlds, our local communities, and realize that you can get by and do things and not have it have a certain type of poisonous byproduct.
Minimalism.
Yeah.
But that's why I was saying earlier, the structures that hold all of this society together, as they continue to collapse, people will realize when they don't have electricity because of an ice storm for a week, more and more people will realize they can't rely on the structure. They can't rely on the healthcare. They can't rely on the electricity, on the food system. And then you have to return to basic. You really do. And you have to make choices. What is it that I need? What is it that I want? But when you do that, also the inequality of wealth is a lot more obvious, because people that have wealth, nature becomes accessible, and everybody else don't have access to nature. And 20 years ago, when I moved to the woods, I knew very well that nature was going to become a privilege for the rich. And we see that already happening. And so people, even if self-sufficiency is super appealing, most people are not in that position to do that. They're struggling in the cities, and they're dependent on these collapsing structure. And we saw, like, in Michigan, was it that there was an ice storm, and like another astrologer, Spencer, didn't have like heat or electricity for like a whole week. And it makes you think, you're just like, oh man, like I'm dependent on all of these things, that as like there's more natural extremes, like of weather extremes and all that, that's going to continue to happen. And that's part of it, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's an important part, because I know, Nicholas, you're like, well, I don't necessarily want to talk, I don't want to keep saying it like this, but I think that's just the nature of Pluto, is we have to like expose and say the taboo thing. And we got to be like, yeah, they're going over to Africa and doing some really bad stuff that's going to bite the world in the ass later. Like if you don't say something, you don't inform people, and it's not pleasant to listen to. And maybe it makes you feel like you don't have any control over, something that's happening. That's part of the dynamics of power and control in Pluto. But if we don't expose it and we don't make it a regular thing to be in knowledge of, right, Aquarius, then we can't reform it, we can't change it, we can't do the right thing, because it'll always be out of view. Or so it's like, I want to be positive, but I also want to be like honest with.
But the result of these things is that smaller communities will monopolize, and that's what happens. That's what we see when you can't rely on the structure. Smaller communities forms and help each other, and that's the whole positive aspects of Aquarius. So but it has to be through initiation. Pluto brings initiation. Pluto's about sacrificial on a collective level. It's, on a personal level, there's an article on astro.com that's great. It's been there forever about Pluto. I think it's Dana Gainhard. I can't pronounce her name,
I think, yeah.
But she's like, a Pluto transit on a personal level, Pluto puts you on the meat hook and hangs you there and leaves you there, and then Pluto comes back and asks you if you're ready to let go of everything that you hold the dearest, and then he leaves again until you're actually ready to do that. Obviously this sounds extremely dramatic, and we're not talking about natal transits, it's collectively, but obviously collectively there is these realization, because it's a slow transit, because it's a 20-year transit, we're not going to see that overnight. It's just happening. We're moving through a lot of changes like that, and we know that the structures we're in are not sustainable. Whether we see the result of that in our lifetime, our life is too short for outer planet like changes, I think.
It's true. I mean, how many Pluto signs do we actually live through, especially when you start to get to the longer ones, which we saw in the original part of the graph? Like you're born during Pluto and Aries or Taurus, you might only see like 2 or 3 Pluto signs, maybe. These are bigger structures. So we're going to excuse Nicholas for a second while Elodie and I talk about a little bit about maybe water distribution, because you think about Aquarius, what's Aquarius doing? It's like dripping the water
interesting.
Everyone. And so I started thinking more about like the power of water, right? We can go how many days without eating, but not having clean water, and we think about Saturn being in Pisces right now too. I'm sure water will come up, but I remember I had a friend whose dad had said in the 70s. He was like, oh, you want to know where the real power is? And you're going to see this is like the bottled water. People are going to start to be taking the water away from people and charging you for water. And I mean, it's so that was kind of something that kind of came up in my head of like,
yeah, interesting. Yeah, especially that Saturn in Pisces will rule like Pluto and Aquarius for a couple of years. So we have Jupiter having kind of the final say also.
yeah, so we'll see if there's any movement on the water. It is important. It is the lifeblood for everyone, people, animals, everyone, birds. This is actually a big one. We haven't even talked about this at all. Scientific advances, especially like bioengineering, and because obviously we're gonna see some big technological advances with science. I mean, we have to, right?
I mean, I think we're seeing it already. The fact that you can just like send your DNA and just like find your origins very quickly is very
yeah. It's well, and then the funny thing is like even those things, because they're just developing those systems, and every time you get like every year there's like an update, and all of a sudden I'm this much more of this and that much I'm like, okay, which is it? Or there's I see this all the time on social media where there's all these like supposedly easy tests of like especially with like fertility or with food allergies, where it's like, just send us your blood or send us this and we're going to send you this whole thing back that's super cheap, that you pay all this amount for a doctor, and basically they're probably scamming people with this technology that's supposed to be advanced to get it on the cheap. So it'll be interesting if more of that's kind of exposed.
They're sourcing. The reason it's cheap is they're sourcing and compiling information. So I think it's part of there's a bunch of stuff going on here. There's the profitable data part of it, and then there's the other part of it that is, in a sense, intentionally from a good place of dealing with healing and dealing with certain things that us as human beings, illness-wise, ailments we want to eliminate, whether certain genetic things, cancer things. It's in us to do that, to solve those things, to feel better, to live longer, right? So I think it's different reasons. But as for the technology, I think it becomes more and more efficient. I think what's happening here, and we see it, and I won't even get into like vaccines per se thing, but as for like what they're doing in the biotech world, and it's partly because of computers and technology that's created the vessels and the tools for more refinement, more rapidness and calculation, and how we come up with things that would have took a longer period of time study wise. It just happens faster now. And so I actually do see an amazing stuff here that's going to happen when we deal with certain illnesses. Is there a one-shot thing that a lot of us think about that's going to solve everything? I'm not the doctor, I'm not the researcher, but I do know that we've, like Elodie said, it's already happening. You already see it. Again, it's is the dream I can go and get something replaced in my body, like someone gets a knee replacement, a hip replacements, which have accelerated in the last 20 years of how easy you go in and out in a day and get a knee replacement. Okay. It used to be something else before. Now, when we come about deeper medical issues, something that's genetic, blood disorders, certain other things, is it going to be more rapid of the solutions more rapid? It takes you 2 days. You're going to do some serious kind of injection blood work, who knows? And you have a recovery time that's fast instead of like 2 years. I think a lot of times this has to do with how rapid something is implemented and then how it integrates in the culture at a cost level, right? So again, whether you agree, COVID, vaccines or whatever, it doesn't matter. They were hustling. Human beings were hustling to come up with something. They sure the hell hustled how to make a COVID test. It's super fast. So this comes back to a thing we were talking earlier about what happens in communities and societies when we're talking about extraction of minerals, all that kind of stuff. In the end, human beings they do hustle. They do when they're put in a certain place in our history, what we do, we always do find a way, right? So I want to think positively about something like this with science and solutions.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll say, it's the repetitive thing I'm going to keep saying is when certain people are holding the keys to this stuff, that means certain people get the solutions first. Those certain people have the cash, and that's where things get funky, And so,
or is the good
also,
of the all? Are they
Yeah.
giving it to everyone? Are they taking a patent just so that they can like monetize like these advancements, for the because I think that's a big thing, like what we talk about AI and the ability to research faster and the ability, I mean, even like a horrible disease, like my grandma passed recently from Parkinson's, and they are now having like these breakthroughs where they're able to actually have earlier detection with Parkinson's by voice and speech, and being able to record how someone is talking and being able to pick up on patterns as it's progressing, and how they can move quicker or have different solutions based on these, kind of technological advances with it. So it's a positive piece, I guess.
Mhm.
we're gonna live eternally.
Yeah, right. Death. We're gonna come up with a solution to avert old Pluto. You can't
Aging.
come from us because we've figured out how to
But
advance beyond.
the other thing that happens with like air period, I think, is the democratization of information. And that's one thing that we see now, how information is shared, and it becomes really difficult because there's not one authority that is right, but there's like various source of information. So that's like a whole other thing that's happening, I think. It's more horizontal, like the way information is distributed. So like people are all doing their micro research, and like academia doesn't mean what it did like 100 years ago or 60 years ago anymore. Although, like we place value on academia, I think, because corporations are now involved in academia, and they're paying research, so it creates biases. People branch out and do their own research, and so we see the people kind of also, there's like a sort of equalizer again that happens because of internet and the access to information. It creates a whole bag of problems. Yes, there's like echo chamber, false news, all of this. Yes, but that's also a sort of like Aquarian principle of, democratizing information, knowledge, all of that stuff.
Yeah, Elodie, I just, the way you did that and said that is an example of just, again, of like what humans do, or what you can do in certain situations, and when you find other people that you connect with in certain things, and what the power of group mentality can do, like in a positive sense, and it's interesting because we're talking about scientific advances in bioengineering, but as I think we all have seen, and even if you're not an astrologer, you're a tarot card reader or whatever, but we actually have seen its own little mini revolution of what plants and herbal magic can do. We call it magic. It just is. It just is what it is. And there's been a resurgence of this. And when we come to healing, that it's actually nothing new. It feels new. We could say trending or whatever, but it isn't new. It goes back to our roots. And it has to do with compiling information in a different way from the past, and how we do it through lineage and through community. And there is something you can never place a price on that. You can never do that, especially if it's something that's passed down through tradition. And so, I'm just going off what you said, Elodie, about, when you branch off, they branch off. We're going to go do this our way. We're going to go do this thing,
Yeah.
And sometimes you might do it in a different way, or we're in a Pluto Aquarius realm. We're going to do it in a way, in a sense, some sort of tool or structure we're going to use that's sort of new so we can compile the information together and come up with something in the lab. our organic lab or whatever you want to call it. But the base core thing goes back to the roots. So, I feel positive about something like this. Like when we're talking about bioengineering, but at the same time, I'm also feeling positive about us people. I don't know what to call us. Just the people who don't have the huge bank accounts or that kind of thing, but what we do together as people, what we come up with, that's why they source us. That's why they want our DNA. That's why ChatGPT wants us to keep putting in there, because in the end, we are the gold. We are the pure whatever. And they need that. They need us, So it's like, once you have that realization, whatever aspect of this Pluto Aquarius, how we do it, once you realize, like, oh, wait a second, like, actually we do have the power, or we can have this thing.
Mostly with consuming, I think, like consuming. Yeah. Well, now it's also with like the way what we choose to consume. I think that's like our biggest power. I always say, if everybody decides tomorrow to leave Instagram, what happens?
Nothing. Yeah. They're gone. It's gone.
Well, yeah. And we've been saying that forever. It's like, where you spend your money is your power. Where you spend your time and your energy is your power. And
but monopolizing the people together is the hard part.
Exactly. That's the hard part, right? Because we're all individuals at the end of the day. But I think I like what you're saying there, Nicholas, about getting back to the roots and the roots of anything, right? And because I think that's the whole nature of Aquarius as well, is like, we keep talking about the system, when the system is essentially the infrastructure, and we're all living within different levels of infrastructure. Now, of course, here in the United States, it's like one of the big things that that has been on the topic of a lot of people's minds in many years, especially the whole Pluto and Capricorn transit, was like the infrastructure that is just dying and decaying, and roads not collapsing. We have like how many days of rain here in San Diego, and I can't even tell you how many roads were just destroyed. Like, so I think that this is going to be a chance to rebuild infrastructure just in general, and that can mean roads, that can mean like the railways. Like another train crash happened in the same area as like East Palestine like 2 days ago, 2 in a row in the same area. Yeah, just this one supposedly didn't have toxic matter on it, but it was the same company. It was a couple towns down in Springfield, Ohio. And, and people have been saying like that those trains and those tracks, and, so it's just like, I feel like a lot of this stuff that is not going to be able to, like, and city planning, just planning in general, like, to get the things that we need to accommodate for people's living quality and water and food and power sources and all that. It's all infrastructure. And who's thinking that up? And is what we have incredibly outdated, and in need of reform? Since we are like double the population of what we were, not even 100 years ago. Like, there's so many more of us these days. I could go off on that, but I'm not going to go there. But Pluto hasn't been in Aquarius since we've had 8 to 9 billion people on the planet either. So
you're and to uphold 8 to 9 billion people, that's a challenge in itself. You have a picture in a slide here of freeways and stuff. We know here in the United States that it's already been sort of a political angle, and I think it will be even more, because when something's inevitable and actually breaking down physically, it's like you can't just avoid it.
Yeah.
So, some of this stuff is obviously, actually takes a different way of thinking to how to finance things like this and the restructure. There's the physical part. And then there's the other part of just how the structure that we use to move in the world, and that has to do with technology too, and thought. And one thing we haven't brought up here, and I know we're getting close to the end here, is decentralization. And how, and whether you're talking about cryptocurrency or the sharing of information, but we're talking about infrastructure in a sense that's been being built or trying to be built. And it's like that's the actual online part of it. But how does something like that be integrated into the physical world, and where they branch together? And I think this is probably one of the biggest focal points in my mind that's going to happen during this transit, is the branching of that. Can decision making as a collective, financial money making as a collective, really fall into a model of decentralization, where not in a sense one center place is running the show or owning it, where we all have our own, we own a part of it, and we hold the keys to that, and someone else doesn't hold the keys for us. And so that goes into actual, to wealth, to resources, and wealth and resources, and how we make decisions with that affect something in the physical infrastructure, like you have here, the integrity, and how we have to come to a place of deciding things. We still have to decide things together. It's just like, does it come from a place where we actually truly have an equal say in the decisions, and how we use resources to build infrastructure? So I don't know what y'all think about that, but
brought me back to the revolution. same part. Go ahead, Elodie.
The infrastructure thing makes me think of like how all of the business centers now are empty because everybody's working at home. So they're in the process of transforming that into like living places, because there's shortage of living space and stuff. But like, I know downtown Montreal is like empty, and the problem is that the rats are kind of taking over all these office buildings, and I'm sure it's not just happening in Montreal. I'm sure it's happening everywhere. It's just like people work from home now, so we have to rethink the way we design cities and things like that. And that was kind of like, that came through with like the first conjunction of like the air period, sort of,
Interesting.
So the way we design and think about cities, I think, is going to get really changed through the air period, and maybe the Pluto and Aquarius will.
Yeah, because Aquarius is design strategy. It's the physical changes and the resources. Yeah, let's do it better. How are we gonna,
build back better? Sorry.
Make the world great again. There's, because that's true. It's like, you can have the resources, you have you see what's falling apart, but if you don't have a plan, you don't have a strategy that fits where we're at this point in time, and not even just this point in time, what we see for ourselves in the future, right? Because there is that's the beauty of Aquarius, is how do we step back? How do we see this bigger perspective, and have a blueprint for what's to come?
We might see an excess of that just because it's Pluto too at the beginning. I think like people who want to build these smart cities and like want to impose these design, or maybe impose, like you were talking about, weather, climate change, and then people putting in place like protocols because of climate change. So let's say there's going to be time for traveling, diminishing traveling, air travel, road travel, like very possibly all of these regulations will come through that will keep us from moving around freely.
I have an example of that already happening here in San Diego. So one of the big things that's happening in San Diego, two things. There are massive buildings being constructed right now, where before you could only build so high in San Diego, but now they've raised it so that you can build much higher. And so there's all these buildings that are going into residential neighborhoods that have they don't have to build parking into these massive, like 100-unit buildings. So they're creating these situations because there's a loophole where they are technically in a transit zone, which San Diego has the worst transit. I mean, we have a bus, we have a trolley that really goes nowhere. Like we don't have a good public transportation. But another thing that is big that's happening within the whole entire like city is that they're just going along these major thoroughfares and creating all red curbs. They're just eliminating parking everywhere. And what they're doing is they're creating bike lanes, right? Yeah. We get people more bike. They're gonna, and first of all, San Diego is big, and San Diego has lots of hills. So as much as I would love to have everybody out there biking, a lot of people might not have the mobility to do such. And they're just wiping out parking left and right. So it's interesting that you say that, Elodie, because it's literally happening.
That's the smart city programs, like
Northern European influenced.
Yeah, I mean, the World Economic Forum and all of those ideas. It's just like creating these cities that you don't actually need to you don't really need to move around.
Well, I mean, you got a picture of a bunch of freeways there, what it is in the United States, right? And that was all built. That was all built, this whole infrastructure, because of the way we structured the country and because of a certain type of part of industrial revolution and the invention of the combustible engine.
Yep.
That's the byproduct of these freeways. We need to build these things so we could do this. And these trucks are going through all over the world to transport goods, so on, from here and there, from point A to point B. So it's
Earth period.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
Earth
and
period.
and it really segues us into the last slide, which is why I put aviation, but in travel in general, because it's what Elodie brought up, and we're kind of riffing on right now, is how do we get around? I mean, aviation is a huge thing that's been coming up ever since like the great travel debacle of the holiday season, where like Southwest had that huge infrastructure breakdown with their outdated computer systems, and how many couple pilots got on and said like the main deal was they had this guy in charge forever that really cared about the infrastructure and building the company to be what it was. He resigned, and then another guy came in, and it was all about the bottom line. How do we get as many butts and as many seats as possible and never fix the situation and have employees getting more stressed out and distraught, and it literally went the opposite direction of everything that this person had built before that was really working. And we almost had like plane collisions recently. We think about these self-driving cars, or maybe even aircrafts at some point. And
that's coming down like around the corner, like tomorrow morning, basically.
Yeah.
The Tesla has the self-driving cars already.
Well, and I had a whole thing online, or that I was watching a program on HBO where they're talking about one of the issues because someone was hit or killed by a self-driving car, and they're finding that there is bias in the AI. Like they are the self-driving car is more likely to identify someone who is like a white man than someone who has a darker skin or has, so there's this whole AI bias that's within, like,
But I love what you said at the beginning, like it's humans programming the AI. So fundamentally, it's a reflection of who we are. And that's so Aquarian. Again, it's such an Aquarian theme. So we might actually see all of the problematics of AI we might be reflected through that, like all of the problematics that come up, like fundamental sort of human issues, just through that filter.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the kind of the changeover of it all. I mean, what does the future bring? I mean, we think about like, oh, we're gonna be living in the space age world, or maybe the UFOs are a big topic right now, where they just found like, are we really gonna get there? What do you guys think? Do you think any of these?
Well, I think this is, like I said, it's like the air period opera opening sequence. So I think like definitely the air period is going to bring so much crazy things, and Pluto and Aquarius is kind of the opening intro where we kind of have to come to grip with that fact.
I know
that maybe in 100 years your grandchildren will be living on Mars. Who
knows?
Yeah, I mean, some final thoughts in my head are, first off, can't forget that this is a death narrative is involved here. So for me, I definitely feel there's a death happening in the way we have looked at what civilization is. We could go back for the last 250 years of just what's happened. And we're definitely at a major shifting point, I think, with this. And where we go from the Industrial Revolution to the technological revolution and how accelerated it's been, there is an end of something. And I don't want to sound bad, like, oh, it's a death, but there is. And I hope people understand that, like, what's coming their way. If you need to do that in order to bring something new to come in. The other part is, the future. It's interesting because in the 1930s, all the way, I would say, into the 90s, in media and culture, especially Western culture, from movies to books to whatever it is, a lot of it had to do with the future and our imagining of the future. And I actually think that a lot of this has been lost because, in the sense, some of the future we caught up with it because of technology. And, that there isn't the same envisioning of what things can be on a longer term route that people were making movies about in the 1950s and 60s, sci-fi movies, or the people writing books about this futuristic something, and whether it's UFOs or time travel or whatever, like what people were dreaming up of what could be. And I feel like the dreaming or the envisioning or that light bulb idea, I think it's always there, but as a culture, it's almost lost. Like what can we do? What can we be? So for me, if I think about, you have this slide that says the future, it's almost to me like even thinking about what the future is as people again, to have visions and hope, and not only just have that, but then to have the ingenuity, the different way of experimenting to make something happen. So it starts with a dream. It starts with some sort of something here in your own world. So, that's why I want to tell people listening here that there's a death happening. And at the same time with that is like, okay, then what can we do? What can we be? And to actually fall into that a little bit, that it's okay to do that, and know that it doesn't happen rapidly. And knowing that in a fast-paced world where time is such of an essence and everything's run by the algorithm, that to give yourself the time and the space to dream and envision something better, something new. So to answer the slide about what the future is, that's my my thing. And
You making me think of the star, Elodie's card, the card of Aquarius. That's what you were just speaking of, essentially.
Yeah, it's true not to become cynical and alienated.
I don't know. It's something I was thinking about last night, and something that I think we have an opportunity in an interesting way for a lot of us. It's hard to see that, but it's like, be alert and aware. And the one thing is, for me being a major Gemini air sign, but I got all this Aquarius stuff, that I could tell you from my own experience that there's something about the Aquarius story and ideal that is like this antenna that picks up on things, and you're picking up on a wavelength or something that is from some other place. It seems like something that's never been heard or seen before. And that antenna is something to stand in and to refine and to let yourself get into. And you can think about it in the Aquarius part of your chart, if you got planets or whatever, but you think about it in a sense of this little antenna that's actually scouting for you. It's scouting around you, and it's picking up on those things and bringing it into your mind. And then what you do with that is there for you. It's there for you to access. So, it's a thing of like, we all have it. I think it's just how dialed in and attuned we are to it. And I think a transit like this will put that in the forefront. So
yeah, I think like basically the way we perceive reality is changing. We've kind of stepped into a parallel sort of. And it made me think, do people in previous eras, because I always bring back the air period, because that's really symptomatic. Like Pluto and Aquarius is symptomatic of the bigger time frame we find ourselves. So I'm just bringing that up all the time because that's kind of how I'm conceptualizing it. And I was like, do people in other air period experience time and consciousness differently than like in Earth period? And because we experience the transition from the Earth into the air, we can really see it. Like people are really attuned. Like we can see this crazy, like it's just common, like everybody's doing magic and whatever, remote viewing and telepathy. It's just becoming kind of common. So there's something happening in terms of the way we perceive reality and time. Like yesterday I had a consultation with somebody, and she started just by saying like, yeah, time is not linear, like the past and the future are all overlapping. And these are concepts that in the 60s it was like, whoa, Timothy Leary or whatever, but now it's like everybody common kind of knowledge. And the more you're into that mindset consciousness, the more you actually realize that's very true. So I do think that, you know, there is that realization, and if we start having pieces of computer implanted into us, even more so, like what's the meaning of consciousness? Where is consciousness going? What is a natural human? Because I think Pluto and Aquarius will corner us, you know, like I was saying with the light cycle and the computer screen stuff. What is actually a natural human? And we might branch off in like various kind of branches of humans might actually branch off into different types of humans.
Yeah.
If we're on the sort of verge of that already, when we're talking about medicine and biohacking and all of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
The time, you made me think of a buzzword that had been going around with the timeline jumping.
Timeline jumping, yeah.
Timeline jumping. And I think, you know, there's something to be said for that, because the last era period, one of the big definers of it was a change in the concept of time. Like there was, you know, having to do with certain clockworks and being able to track time in a certain way. And like, you know, and I get on consultations. I've had a few consultations, not as of late, where people are like, I feel like there's just a different concept of time going on.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I just don't feel like, and it's just, it's different. So I think that is a big part of that reality shift, right?
Yeah. And Pluto and Aquarius, I guess, like, because we're talking about Pluto, it brings the obsessive side of Aquarius. So it might get, I personally think like the air period might get a little bit worse before it gets better. That's my, and I don't want to, you know, people who don't have the astrological context to conceptualize what I'm talking about. It becomes scary when we talk about these words, but at this point we're like almost 2.5 hours in. If you're still following, then but we're moving with Uranus into Gemini, which will accentuate even more air. This whole decade is very destabilizing. I think it increasingly, especially when Pluto's going to square Saturn and Taurus, we're going to see like, it's going to be tumultuous. That's my, you know, that's my astrologer's perspective on the whole, you know, timeline. I don't think we're going into stability. I think we're going into major destabilization.
Yeah.
So, well, but it doesn't mean that we can't be positive through this. It's, well, you know,
if what's stable doesn't really work for a lot of people in the planet, I mean, there's good things about destabilization, even if it is disruptive.
Revolution.
And the revolution. And it's true, you know, like, and that's going to be some of the biggest part of these key Pluto time periods that we, you know, keep talking about. Saturn Pluto square, it's going to happen in 2028, 2029. There'll be a Plutonian North Node solar eclipse on January 26th, 2028. There'll be a Jupiter Pluto conjunction in 2033. And then not too long afterwards, that's going to be a Saturn Pluto opposition and a Jupiter Pluto square, while Pluto's on the south node from 2035 to 2036. So
that's
really
good times.
Yeah. Right, so 2028, 2029, and then 2035 and 2036, like these are, I feel like that's going to be like the big Pluto and Aquarius pieces. And of course, we're going to have to wait to find that out.
Yeah, totally. I, you know, just to say something too, you know, we brought up the destabilization thing and all that. And I think it's part of it, but it's also part of being human is mutating and being mutable too, to remember the mutable parts of yourself. But you have a Uranus and Gemini relationship with Pluto and Aquarius that on paper is pretty good, actually, like because of a trine. So it's like, there is something there. There's some flow. Once it's dialed in, it's there. I just got to tell all my air signs, or people have heavy air because we're going into air. It's like you got to get out of your head too to balance it. What happens with Aquarius and Geminis a lot of times is they're up here and they're computing and they forget about the rest of their body. So it's like, in order for things to flow and the benefit of a trine or something like that to happen, is you still have to kind of bring everything back down, you know, where things are destabilized, to stabilize yourself, come back in, jump back in, and actually take advantage of an air sign trine like that.
I love that.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
see a lot of people talking somatics like on Instagram,
Yes.
which is kind of ironic because it's
Mhm.
like we have to be on Instagram to talk about somatics. What?
Yeah.
You know? But the sort of compulsive scrolling and all of that takes us completely out of our bodies. So it's
Yeah.
like we have so much access to information and we're just like, oh my God, it's endearing. Like we just want to be involved. We just want to be into it. And it's very hard actually to sit there without a phone. There was like this little clip I saw of like they challenged like kids who grew up with their phone to put their phone there for an hour and not touch it, and they were like just completely twisting in their chair, like not able to control themselves.
You brought up, Elodie, you brought up something right here that
I
is
know.
so huge. I think here we have to remember, I'm just going to preach a little bit. Past the Pluto transit, but whatever it is, well, I guess it's part of Pluto, is to remember what mystery is. And you could be sitting at a bus stop before cell phones. Maybe you had a Walkman on and you were listening to music, but maybe you weren't, and most people weren't. And you're sitting at a bus stop and you're either talking to the person next to you or you're just kind of wandering off waiting for the bus to come. And you're just staring at whatever's, and you're going wherever you're going within yourself and your connection to the world. You're imagining things, you're running over whatever is going. There's no phone in front of you. There's no other distraction. And those spaces of being human has to do with connecting to the universe and the mystery of the universe. So, it's like we talk about technology, we talk about all this thing here, but if we want to talk about true power or re-empowerment, it's like, part of it too, we talk about our integration, but first and foremost, maybe it comes back to the place before we meet in the groups, before we change things as a collective, to let ourselves be in the mysterious dream world place without a distraction. Because it's like in our inherent human power. That's where love comes from. That's where all our emotions, the way we process, and our insights that come in so we can take steps in our own just story, our personal story. And then we bring that personal story to the people we love or whatever. But it really comes from the place of nothing, of what's in between the ones and zeros. That's not one or zero. It's something else. And so anybody who knows has created anything in their life knows that when you're in the zone creating, you're not thinking about ones and zeros or the efficiency. You are lost in mystery. And so, if you're looking for the place to go to during the next 20 years or the transits or tomorrow, it's to go back to what Elodie's thing is like, hey, maybe it's part of it is not having the thing in front of them and like going back to this place of like, true autonomy. Like it starts there. Like true autonomy is connection to mystery. Then you go have a drink with your friends who are doing the same thing,
Well, that's how you get a connection to the source, right? That's how you get the antenna to connect. Like you have to not have stimulus in order to be there.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that. And I was just gonna like, I know you're Pluto and Virgo, Nicholas, but I think Pluto and Libra generation has something to do with this Pluto and Aquarius transit, because we're the last generation that grew up without technology.
Yes.
We're kind of like we're the last, and I feel like there's something about the trine aspect to Pluto and Libra. There's just something really, it's kind of like our turn to step in and kind of bring back a little bit of that memory into the collective or something.
We're bridging the gap. Pluto and Libra.
Sure. Charm me, Pluto and Libra. I don't mind being charmed by Venus in the end.
You don't look very charmed.
Do we go off on a tangent about Libras or no?
No, we don't. We don't. We leave it in our Aquarius land.
Sure,
well, I think
good, tastes good.
Well, we're in Saturn's territory here, so I guess Saturn is exalted there. So
I have a Sun Saturn conjunction in Libra. I'm not a typical Libra.
You are a special Libra who's gonna shine once Pluto comes around.
Do you have Pluto in Libra?
I do.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen a lot of the 90s music coming through now, and a lot of that cycling through, because we have Saturn entering Pisces, and I think there's going to be this huge echo of like that period, like
It's
the
already
90s.
happening. The last
It
48
is already
hours.
happening.
I saw it and I was like, I feel old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, it is the first time I felt old actually recently with some of the trends, and I'm like, I mean, yeah,
Not me. I love it. I was like, skater pants. Yes. I'm
I'm like, don't you bring those Jankos back? Do not bring. You put those back. You don't give us those long denim skirts. No,
I'm so into it. I'm like, that was the fashion of high school. I'm like, yes.
I don't want it back.
I'm thinking about too of being in Seattle during obviously late 80s, early 90s. I was involved in the music scene there. So I've been seeing things lately because of Saturn and Pisces, with the 93, 96 is the dates. So what people are doing, and I'm like, okay, because I was in the middle of all that. So it's interesting to have that come up and know what that means and what was happening culturally too. Just from the clothes.
Such a vibe.
Such a vibe. And actually it's that in between space too, kind of the space that happened from analog to digital. It was starting the hints of crossing over, but it still felt very organic and analog. But it was kind of a turning point eventually. It's just something that was shifting. You didn't know it, you didn't know it then, but I gotta say, after hearing some of the music and what people are posting, I'm like, there's some great stuff that came out of there.
Totally.
Not just musically, but thought-wise.
But the funny thing is, in high school, we were listening to the 60s, we were so into the hippie and like the 70s.
dropping acid, listening to Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, totally.
So I used to fall asleep to Comfortably Numb with my Walkman every night. Like, that was my jam.
That's it.
That's very Saturn and Pisces. I'm like, okay, I'm comfortably numb. Send me to bed.
I had a poster of Kurt Cobain, like the size of my whole ceiling, that said, "I hate myself and I want to die." That's on top of my bed.
Oh my God. It's funny because I literally just watched a whole in-store because Nirvana played here in San Diego at Off the Record in 1991. And I just came across, like, someone posted it on YouTube, and I went through the whole thing and went back to that time. And it was special. It was different.
I do hope, like, just kind of sidetracking Saturn Pisces, but I'm hoping there's some good music that comes out of this transit.
I think there will be.
Yeah.
Saturn, Neptune. Yes. Yeah. Also, the timing of what we're coming out of pandemic wise, whatever the experience is for you, and a collective death story, along with everything we've talked about, I actually think we're about to go through an interesting creative output because of what we've been through. And that happens with collective death process. Like it happens when you have to take a major shift in your life, or you change your life because of whatever happened to you, COVID. You quit your job. I'm going to go bake bread now. It was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to follow my creative something. And so it's like, I think we don't even have a clue yet, but we're going to start to definitely see it during this transit.
It's very exciting.
Me too. Yeah. I'm totally excited for it. Like,
I'm excited for it. I feel already in it. I've been making a lot of stuff lately and kind of getting back in. And so I'm ready for it.
That's awesome.
That's a good way to be ending. Are we going to end?
We're going to end on that. We're going to end on that sweet note here. Normally I'd be like, tell me one word, but you know what? There is not one word for Pluto and Aquarius. I think we had about 5 million words that we just shared here today. Yeah.
Thanks so
all right. Yeah. Let's have a little recap. Nicholas, where can people find you? What you got going on?
You can find me on the internet.
Okay.
using your cell phone, your technology, at my website, sparklesofgold.com.
That's weird.
On Instagram, and definitely YouTube. That is becoming my home, and it will be my home. Find me on there. I got some interesting things I'm about to do with this Pluto Aquarius story to really mess with people's heads. So that's what's up with me.
Love it. Elodie, where can people find you? What you got going on?
Well, my website is ninthhouseastrology.com. I'm on Instagram, but I have a private profile because scammers. So I stand in the gates and I only let the chosen ones in.
But it's worth it. You want to follow her. So you got wonderful content.
Thank you. you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
for putting this
I
together,
guess,
Mel.
yeah, I guess I'll be speaking at Nightlight like in a couple of weeks on archaeo astrology, so really ancient astrology.
Ooh,
On the 19th of March. So
I registered for that last night.
Woo!
perfect. All right,
Come learn
19th
some
of
new things.
March.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, you can find me over at energeticprinciples.com, where I will share both Nicholas and Elodie's information over on my blog site over there. Also, you can maybe find me on Instagram, although I have already gone the way of rebellion, and it's like pulling teeth to touch it these days. I don't know why. I just can't pull myself together to share any thoughts that are in my head. But maybe that will change. Maybe there'll just be an influx of this energy coming in. You're like, you know what? I got things to say again. I got plenty to say. I just don't have the focus or the discipline in order to do it. But you may find me there.
I loved your slides today. That was really good.
Oh, thank
Your
you. Thank you.
slides, yeah.
Yeah, let's be real here, everybody. Just so you know this. There was a timeline that Mel wrote, these slides, all that is all Mel. Mel, and I, both Ellie and I have been on your show before, and this is what you do, and I'm always amazed by it because it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. Definitely lots of work.
So
yeah.
you rock, Mel. We see what you're doing.
Thanks. Well, I would like to teach more. That's actually on my because I love putting in their slides and ideas, and so that is on the visionary radar. So stay tuned with that. Well, if you're listening to this somewhere, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube and you want to share what you thought of our riff on Pluto and Aquarius, or you have some of your own visions to share. We'd love to hear them. Share it with a friend. Sharing is caring. All that good stuff. Well, I had such a great time talking with you both today. I'm so glad we were able to come together on the spur of the moment. The universe came together for us to talk here, and then it pulled us apart and we almost didn't talk, but then we got it back together and we did talk, and I'm so glad we did, because I think we did a bang up job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, good luck out there as we go through this great shift that is March of 2023. It's big astrology out there, almost too big. So we wish you all the best of luck. And as always, may the stars be with you.